The Müller-Lyer illusion is a simple image that tricks your brain. It shows two lines of the same length, but they look different. The key to this illusion is the arrows at the ends of each line. One line has arrows that point out like this. The other line has arrows that point in like this. Even though both lines are the same length, the one with inward-pointing arrows looks shorter than the one with outward-pointing arrows. This is not just a small difference. To many people, the lines can look very different in length. This is the illusion at work. This trick has puzzled scientists, teachers, and artists for over 100 years. It shows how the brain processes shapes, edges, and space. When you see a line, your brain doesn't just see it for what it is. It uses the surrounding shapes to figure out what the line means. In the Müller-Lyer illusion, the arrows change how your brain interprets the line's length. The brain tries to take a shortcut, and in doing so, it makes a mistake. To understand why this happens, think about how we see in the real world. Our brains are wired to judge depth, size, and space based on what we've learned from our environment. If you see a building, you know it's large, even if it looks small from far away. You don't have to think about it. Your brain adjusts the size automatically. This is called size constancy. It helps us move through the world without having to measure everything. But it also means that in some cases, like with the Müller-Lyer illusion, our brain makes a guess that's wrong. Now imagine a hallway. You're standing at one end, looking toward a door at the other end. The walls of the hallway form angles that go outward from your point of view. These are like the outward-pointing arrows in the illusion. Your brain has learned that this pattern means the object is farther away. So, when you see, your brain thinks the line is farther away, like the end of a hallway. It then assumes the line must be longer than it looks. On the other hand, when you see, it's like looking at the corner of a room that sticks out toward you. Your brain treats this like a closer object, so it thinks the line is nearer, and based on what it knows about the world, assumes it's shorter. The brain wants to adjust for distance, but there is no real distance in the image. Both lines are flat on a page or screen. The arrows trick the brain into thinking there's depth when there isn't. This depth-based explanation is one of the main theories behind the illusion. Some experts call it the perspective theory. It connects how we see images to how we see the real world. It suggests that the illusion taps into the brain's built-in system for judging space and distance. Another idea is that the illusion works because of how the brain responds to context. That means the shapes around something can change how we see it. In this case, the arrows are the context. They don't change the line's length, but they do change how the brain sees the line. Think of it like this. If someone tells you a person is tall, that's just a fact. But if you see that person standing next to a group of basketball players, they might look short. Nothing changed about the person's height, but the context made it seem different. That's what happens in this illusion. In some experiments, people are asked to draw a line that matches the one in the illusion. Even when told the trick, they still get it wrong. This shows how deep the illusion goes. It's not just a surface-level mistake. It's baked into how we see things. Kids and adults both fall for the illusion, but not always in the same way. In some studies, children don't see the illusion as strongly as adults. This might mean that the brain learns this way of seeing over time. The more we live in a world full of buildings, corners, and rooms, the more our brain starts to use these depth tricks. In cultures where people don't live around a lot of straight edges and corners, the illusion can be weaker. This supports the idea that the illusion isn't just in the eye, but also in how the brain has learned to process what it sees. To get a better feel for the illusion, try this at home. Draw two lines on a piece of paper. Make sure they are the same length. Then draw arrowheads pointing in on one line and out on the other. Show the picture to someone else and ask them which line is longer. Most people will pick the line with the arrows pointing out. You can even measure the lines with a ruler to show they are the same. The reaction you get will likely be surprise. That moment of surprise is the power of the illusion. The Müller-Lyer illusion has been used in many fields. In psychology, it helps researchers study how the brain processes vision. In design, it warns creators to think about how shapes might be misread. For example, when making signs or user interfaces, designers need to make sure people won't misjudge size or distance. A button might look too small or too big if surrounded by the wrong shapes. Even in architecture, this illusion matters. A hallway that ends in a certain kind of shape can feel longer or shorter than it really is. Architects who understand this illusion can use it to their advantage. They can make a space feel bigger without changing its size. There's also interest in how the illusion works across species. Some studies have shown that certain animals also fall for the illusion. For instance, pigeons trained to peck at a longer line often pick the wrong one in a Müller-Lyer setup. This suggests that some parts of the illusion are tied to basic parts of vision, not just human culture. But other animals, like fish, don't fall for it. That tells us something too. It means that some parts of the illusion may be learned, while others may be built into the visual system itself. You can also see the illusion play out in digital settings. In virtual reality, for instance, if you place arrows around objects, you can change how people feel about the size of those objects. This has been tested in games and simulations. Designers use these ideas to lead players in certain directions or make spaces feel more open or tight, depending on what they want to show. The illusion also raises questions about trust. If you can't always trust what you see, what does that mean? Vision is one of our main senses, and yet this simple trick shows it can be fooled. That doesn't mean vision is weak. It means that vision is smart, but not perfect. The brain makes guesses to help us understand the world quickly. Most of the time, these guesses are right, but sometimes, like in this illusion, the guess is off. What the Müller-Lyer illusion shows, above all, is that seeing is not the same as measuring. You might see something that looks longer, but it isn't. The brain doesn't act like a ruler. It acts like a smart filter, trying to make sense of things as fast as it can. Most of the time, that works well. But in cases like this, that smart filter gets tricked. And once you see the illusion, it's hard to unsee it. Even if you know the lines are the same length, they don't look the same. That's the strange and lasting effect of the Müller-Lyer illusion. The Café wall illusion is a visual effect where straight horizontal lines look like they are slanting. You may stare at a tiled pattern and feel like something is off. It seems like the lines should be flat, but your eyes tell you they are sloped. This illusion gets its name from a real wall at a cafe in Bristol, England, where people first noticed the strange effect. The wall had black and white tiles, staggered like bricks, and it made the lines between the rows look crooked, even though they were perfectly straight. To understand what's happening, picture a simple brick wall. Instead of using only red bricks, this wall alternates between black and white tiles. Each row shifts the pattern a little, like stacking the bricks so they don't line up vertically. Between each row is a thin line, often gray. This line is supposed to separate the rows, but instead it creates the illusion that the rows tilt. Your brain sees a slant where none exists. The illusion works because of the way the brain processes edges and contrast. The lines between the tiles are straight, but the edges of the tiles shift back and forth. This change in alignment confuses the visual system. It mixes up vertical and horizontal information. The brain tries to make sense of the small shifts and high contrast. It reads the slight misalignments as angles, even when none are there. To get a better feel for it, imagine laying tiles on a kitchen wall. You decide on black and white tiles and arrange them so that every other tile is offset. You then add thin gray grout between the rows. When you step back and look, the grout lines look like they slant up and down across the wall. But if you place a ruler on the lines, you'll see they are level. That's the illusion in action. The eyes receive the correct shape, but the brain processes it incorrectly. This is not just a trick of color. You can try the same pattern in shades of gray and still get the same effect. The important part is the contrast and the shift in position. High contrast, such as black and white, is stronger, but even a moderate contrast can produce the illusion. The size of the tiles also matters. When the tiles are very small or very large, the illusion can get weaker. There seems to be a size range where the brain is most easily fooled. Another factor is the position of the gray lines. If they are placed evenly and have a certain thickness, the illusion appears strong. If they are too thin or too thick, the effect fades. Researchers have tested this by changing the pattern slightly each time and asking people what they see. They measure how much the lines appear to tilt, and they find that certain designs make the illusion more powerful. This effect also shows how sensitive the brain is to context. It does not process each shape in isolation. Instead, it looks at the relationship between shapes. When one row of tiles shifts a little from the row above it, the brain tries to find a pattern. It ends up creating a false one. It connects the edges of the tiles and fills in the gaps with a slant that doesn't exist. This process helps in everyday vision, but in cases like this, it produces a mistake. The Café wall illusion belongs to a group of visual effects called tilt illusions. These are patterns where straight or parallel lines look like they lean or bend. What makes the Café wall version interesting is how strong it can be. Even people who know it's an illusion still see the slant. This shows how hardwired the effect is. The brain does not just passively receive information. It tries to figure out the shapes and positions based on what it expects to see. The reason we fall for this illusion may be linked to how the brain detects edges. In vision science, edge detection is a basic process. It helps us see where one object ends and another begins. The brain looks for areas where the brightness changes. In the Café wall pattern, these changes happen often and sharply. The shift from black to white creates a strong contrast, and the brain tries to make sense of it quickly. When the tiles are offset, the contrast appears to move diagonally. The brain treats it as a tilt, even when the real edge is straight. To test this yourself, you can draw a pattern on paper or use a simple design tool on a computer. Make rows of rectangles alternating black and white. Shift each row slightly so that the corners don't line up. Add thin gray lines between rows. Then look at the image. The grout lines should appear to slope even though they are straight. If you use a ruler, you can confirm the lines are not tilted. Try showing the pattern to someone else without telling them it's an illusion. Ask them if they notice anything strange. Most people will say the lines aren't straight, even though they are. You may notice the illusion gets stronger when viewed from a distance, or when you blur your eyes a little. This happens because the brain focuses less on small details and more on the overall shape. At close range, you might be able to focus on individual tiles and lines. But as you step back, the brain switches to a broader view and the illusion kicks in. This also explains why the illusion was so noticeable on a real wall. People walking past the café would see the wall from a few feet away and get a full view of the pattern. That's when the illusion would take effect. In some studies, scientists have tried to track how the eye moves when looking at the pattern. They find that the eyes don't move in a straight line across the rows. Instead, they tend to jump between the edges of the tiles, following the shift in contrast. These jumps might contribute to the illusion. The brain collects the data from these movements and tries to create a straight line, but because the eye keeps getting pulled to the edges, the brain misreads the direction. This kind of research has uses outside of psychology. Designers, architects, and artists can use what they learn from illusions like this one to create or avoid certain effects. For example, if a tiled floor uses this kind of offset pattern, it might look sloped or uneven to some people. That could be a problem in places like hospitals or schools, where clear, flat space is important. On the other hand, someone might use the illusion on purpose to make a space feel more dynamic or unusual. You might also see this kind of effect in digital settings. In a video game or virtual environment, if the floor or wall uses a high contrast pattern with a slight offset, it can make the space look distorted. Game designers sometimes use these illusions to create feelings of confusion, tension, or surrealism. The illusion becomes a tool to shape the experience of the player. Some people are more sensitive to the illusion than others. Factors like age, eye health, and even attention span can change how strongly someone sees the effect. In lab settings, researchers can measure this by asking people to adjust the pattern until the lines look straight. They find that the amount of adjustment needed changes from person to person. One way to think about the café wall illusion is to see it as a gap between what the eyes see and what the brain understands. The image enters the eye as it really is, straight lines, neat rows. But the brain tries to process the relationships between tiles, edges, and spaces. It adds in a guess based on contrast and position. That guess turns out to be wrong, but the brain sticks with it because it fits the pattern it thinks it sees. What makes the Café wall illusion powerful is not how it tricks the eye, but how it reveals the brain's methods. It shows that vision is not a simple process of taking in light and turning it into shapes. Instead, it's a layered system of rules, shortcuts, and guesses. Most of the time, those guesses are right, but sometimes in a pattern as simple as a tiled wall, they are not. The checker shadow illusion is a simple image that creates a strong and lasting trick on the eyes. In this illusion, two squares on a checkerboard pattern appear to be very different in color, even though they are exactly the same. One square looks much darker than the other. But if you take away the surrounding context, you'll see that both squares are the same shade of gray. The illusion was created by Edward Adelson, a professor of vision science, and it remains one of the clearest examples of how the brain can misjudge light and color. The setup of the illusion looks like a regular checkerboard. Some squares are light and some are dark, arranged in the familiar alternating pattern. A cylinder sits on part of the board, casting a shadow over a few squares. In this scene, one square labeled A sits in the light, and another square labeled B sits in the shadow. Square A looks like a dark square in the checkerboard. Square B, on the other hand, appears to be a much lighter square. But here's the trick. A and B are the same color. The difference is not in the squares themselves, but in how the brain interprets the image around them. This illusion happens because the brain does not judge color or brightness on its own. Instead, it looks at the colors and shades nearby and uses that context to make a decision. The brain sees that square B is in shadow. It knows that things in shadows usually look darker than they really are. So it makes an adjustment. It assumes the square must be lighter than it looks. At the same time, square A is not in shadow, so the brain sees its color as more direct. This leads to a misreading. Square A looks darker than square B, even though both are the same. To test this for yourself, you can use a photo editing tool. Open the image of the illusion and sample the color from both squares. You'll see that the color values match. Or you can use a piece of paper to cover the rest of the checkerboard, leaving only the two squares visible. Once the rest of the image is hidden, the illusion goes away. The squares now look the same. This shows how much the surrounding information matters. This effect is tied to how our visual system handles lighting and shadow. The brain wants to see the world in a consistent way, even when light conditions change. This ability is called lightness constancy. It means that a white piece of paper still looks white, whether you're indoors or outside, in shade or in sun. Your brain adjusts the way it sees the paper so that it looks correct in each setting. This is usually helpful, but it also means that the brain can be fooled by a clever image like the checkerboard. In the case of the checker shadow illusion, the brain is doing its job. It sees a shadow, and it tries to fix the way it sees the color in that shadow. It works well in the real world, where lighting is always changing. But in this image, the trick is that the lighting doesn't change the actual shade of the square. It only looks that way. The brain adjusts for something that isn't real, and that causes the illusion. This illusion is also related to a process called simultaneous contrast. This is when the color or brightness of one object affects how we see the color or brightness of another object nearby. If you put a gray square on a white background, it looks darker than if you put the same gray square on a black background. The color hasn't changed, but it looks different because of what's around it. In the checker shadow illusion, square B is surrounded by darker areas in the shadow. That makes it look lighter by comparison. Square A is surrounded by lighter squares, so it looks darker. Now imagine this happening in real life. Picture a white coffee mug sitting on a table under a tree. The leaves cast a shadow over part of the mug. You still know it's a white mug, even though part of it looks gray. Your brain makes that correction without you noticing. It says, this area is in shadow, so the real color must be lighter than what I see. The illusion takes this automatic process and flips it. It uses that brain function against itself. The checker shadow illusion shows how much the brain depends on assumptions. It assumes that light comes from a certain direction. It assumes that shadows make things look darker. It assumes that checkerboards follow a regular pattern of alternating colors. All of these help you function in the world, but they also leave you open to visual tricks. This illusion is not just for fun, it's used in research to study how vision works. Scientists use it to explore how the brain processes information about light, color, and context. It helps explain why people with normal vision can see the same image in very different ways, depending on what they expect to see. Designers and artists also take this illusion seriously. They know that colors don't exist on their own. A color in one setting can look very different in another. That's why graphic designers test their work in different lighting and on different backgrounds. A button that looks bright on a white screen might look dull on a dark one. A painter might mix the same shade of paint for two areas in a painting, but those areas can appear different depending on the colors around them. The checker shadow illusion is a strong reminder that color is not a fixed value. It's a perception that changes with context. There are other illusions that use similar tricks. One version places a gradient behind the squares, so the shadow isn't caused by an object, but by a change in lighting. Another version removes the cylinder, but keeps the shadow. Even then, the illusion still works. This proves that it's the shadow and surrounding tiles, not the object casting the shadow, that causes the effect. Some people ask why the brain doesn't see through the illusion. If you know the squares are the same, why can't you make yourself see them that way? The answer is that this process happens deep in the visual system, before you even become aware of it. The brain corrects for lighting automatically. It doesn't ask you for permission. You can measure and test the colors and know the truth, but your visual system still reports them as different. This effect also helps explain why lighting design is so important in places like theaters, photo studios, or product displays. A piece of clothing might look dull in one light and rich in another. That's not just because of the actual color. It's because of how the brain adjusts what it sees based on light and shadow. The illusion highlights how little control we have over that process, even when we know it's happening. You can even see versions of the checker shadow illusion in everyday objects. Think about a tiled bathroom floor. If sunlight hits part of it, the tiles in shadow may appear to be a different color than the ones in light. But if you cover up the rest of the scene and focus on just two tiles, you may find they're actually the same. The same happens in digital displays. The lighting around your screen or the brightness of nearby objects can affect how you see the colors on the screen. The checker shadow illusion shows that our perception of color is shaped by more than just what hits our eyes. It's shaped by our brain's effort to interpret the scene. The brain wants to give us useful information. It wants to tell us what color something really is, not just what it looks like at the moment. That makes us good at understanding the world, but it also means we can be misled in a controlled setting. When we see two squares as different colors, even though they're the same, it's not a flaw in the system. It's the system working exactly as it's designed, just not in the way we expect. The Ames Room is a room built to trick the eyes. It makes one person look like a giant and another person look very small, even though both people are normal size. The illusion works because the room is not built like a normal room. It has a special shape that causes the brain to misjudge what it sees. At first glance, the room looks ordinary. The floor seems flat. The ceiling appears level. The walls look straight and the corners seem square. There's even a checkerboard floor or some other regular pattern to make it look more believable. But the room is not what it seems. The walls are actually slanted. The ceiling and floor are tilted. One corner of the room is much farther away than the other. All these changes are hidden when you look at the room from a fixed spot. That one spot is where the illusion works. From that viewing point, your eyes receive an image that seems to show a normal room. Since the brain thinks the room is regular, it expects people in the room to follow the same rules of distance and size. When one person stands in the far corner and another stands in the close corner, they appear to be in the same depth plane, but they're not. One is much farther from the camera than the other. Because of this, the person who is farther away looks much smaller. The person who is closer looks much larger. This size difference is not because of any change in the people, but because of the way the room is built and how the brain interprets it. To understand this better, picture a normal rectangular room. The back wall is flat. The side walls are straight and meet the back wall at right angles. If you put two people in the room, one in each back corner, and look at them from a center point in the front of the room, they will look about the same size, unless one person is actually taller. That's because they are the same distance from the viewer, and the room is shaped in a way that your brain understands. Now imagine changing the shape of the room. Push one back corner farther away. Pull the other corner closer. Tilt the floor and ceiling to match these changes. Now the person in the farther corner is much more distant, and the person in the closer corner is almost right in front of you. But if you look through a special hole in the wall, or use a camera placed in a fixed position, the room still looks rectangular. The shapes and angles fool your depth perception. This kind of setup tricks your brain because it uses familiar rules. Your brain has learned how big a room should look. It uses the shape of the floor, the walls, and the lines in the room to make guesses about size and distance. In the Ames Room, those lines are fake. They're stretched and tilted in just the right way to create a false sense of space. So when you look through the peephole, your brain tells you the people are changing size when they're just changing position. If you watch someone walk from one side of the Ames Room to the other, it looks even stranger. They seem to grow or shrink as they walk. But they're not doing anything except moving across the room. Your eyes are seeing the movement, but the shape of the room is tricking your brain into thinking they are changing size. The illusion is strong because your brain trusts the shape of the room more than the actual size of the person. This illusion depends on monocular viewing. That means using one eye instead of two. When you look through the peephole, your depth perception is limited. You don't get the normal 3D cues you'd get from using both eyes. That makes it easier for the brain to be fooled by the fake depth of the room. If you were allowed to move around and look at the room from different angles, the trick wouldn't work. You'd quickly see that the room is not shaped the way it first appeared. But when you're forced to look from just one spot, your brain fills in the missing details with what it expects. The Ames Room works because of forced perspective. That's a technique where the angle or shape of something is changed to make it look different in size or position. You see this in movies all the time. A filmmaker might place an actor farther from the camera and another actor closer, but use camera tricks to make them look like they're standing side by side. The result is that one actor appears tiny and the other seems huge. The Ames Room uses this same trick, but in a fixed space. This illusion has been used in theme parks, museums, and television. If you've ever seen a scene where a person seems to shrink or grow just by walking across a room, it was probably shot in an Ames Room or used a similar technique. People enjoy these illusions because they are simple to understand, but hard to explain. Once you know how it works, it seems obvious, but before that, it looks like magic. The Ames Room also shows how much your brain relies on context. It doesn't just look at people and objects, it looks at everything around them, the room, the walls, the floor, and uses that information to decide how big or small something is. This usually helps. In the real world, context makes it easier to judge distance and size. But in a setting like this, where the context is false, the brain's judgment becomes inaccurate. You can recreate a simple version of this illusion at home with cardboard or paper. Build a small room with one side deeper than the other. Make the floor and ceiling slope slightly. Cut a peephole in the front. Place two small figures inside, one in each corner. Look through the peephole. The figure in the deeper corner will look much smaller. Move the figures and see the size change happen. This shows that the illusion doesn't depend on fancy tools. It just depends on how you build the space and how you control the viewpoint. Even though the Ames Room is not used in everyday life, the ideas behind it show up in many areas. In architecture, interior design, and art, people use forced perspective to change how a space feels. A hallway that narrows toward the end can look longer than it really is. A ceiling that slopes gently upward can make a room feel taller. These tricks rely on the same principles as the Ames Room. They play with angles and space to shape how people see the world. The Ames Room also teaches something about how people learn. Children might not be fooled by the illusion in the same way as adults. That's because their brains are still learning how rooms are supposed to look. In contrast, adults have a strong mental model of what a room should be like. That model makes it easier for the illusion to work. In that way, the Ames Room is not just a trick. It's a tool for studying how people grow to understand space and size. When you see someone look huge on one side of the room and tiny on the other, you may laugh or feel surprised. But what's really happening is your brain trying to do its job. It's working with the information it has and using past experience to make sense of what it sees. Most of the time, that process works very well. But in this one special room, with its slanted walls and tilted floor, your brain's assumptions lead it to the wrong answer. The person didn't change size. The room changed shape. The illusion proves that even when the eyes see clearly, the brain still makes its own decision about what is real. The Penrose Triangle is a shape that looks like it could exist in 3 dimensions, but it cannot. When you first see it, it seems like a normal solid object made of 3 straight beams that join at right angles to form a triangle. Each corner looks like a standard bend in a block. Your brain sees a clear, solid shape and tries to understand it as a real thing. But if you try to build it in the real world, you will find it's impossible. This shape is often called an impossible object. That means it looks like something that could be built, but the shape breaks the rules of space and geometry. The Penrose Triangle is one of the most famous of these illusions. It was first described by Oscar Reuterswärd, a Swedish artist who made many such figures. Later, Lionel Penrose and his son Roger Penrose made the triangle more widely known, especially in connection with psychology and visual science. The triangle works as an illusion because of how the mind processes depth and angles. Each part of the triangle on its own makes sense. If you look at one corner, it looks like a beam bent at 90 degrees. The shading helps this illusion by making the beam seem thick and 3-dimensional. But when your eyes follow the full shape, something strange happens. The beams don't connect in a way that fits normal space. They twist around in a loop that never quite works. The top corner looks like it connects to the bottom one, but when you trace the shape carefully, the connections don't line up. Still, the whole thing looks solid. That is what makes it so compelling. To see why the triangle is impossible, imagine trying to build it from blocks. You could make each corner with a bent piece of wood or metal, but when you try to join all 3 together, the last piece won't match the others. It will either float in space or cut through another piece in a way that breaks the solid form. You can't close the shape without violating the rules of 3-dimensional geometry. What makes the illusion strong is that, in a drawing or photo, your brain ignores those problems. It fills in the gaps and smooths over the errors, so the object appears solid even though it can't be. This happens because the brain expects shapes to follow certain rules. It sees lines and shading and uses that information to guess the shape of a solid object. In most cases, this system works well. It helps you understand what you see in the real world. You can look at a box or a chair and instantly understand its form, size, and distance. But the Penrose Triangle is a trick. It uses the same visual cues as real objects, but arranges them in a way that doesn't match real space. The brain sees what it expects to see, not what is actually there. This illusion is not just a visual puzzle. It teaches something important about how people see. Perception is not just about the eyes. It's also about how the brain interprets what the eyes send. In the case of the Penrose Triangle, your brain tries to build a 3-dimensional shape from a 2-dimensional drawing. It uses depth cues like shading, angles, and overlapping lines to do this. But the cues in the drawing are mixed up in a way that leads to a false result. A good way to understand this is by trying to draw the triangle yourself. Start with one corner, making an L-shaped block. Then add the second leg, connecting it with another right-angle bend. Now try to finish the triangle. No matter how you draw the third side, you'll see that it either doesn't connect or looks strange. To make it look correct, you have to cheat. You draw the third beam in a way that tricks the viewer. It may twist in space or change thickness to match the others. When viewed from just the right angle, the whole shape looks correct. But from any other angle, the illusion breaks. Artists and designers often use the Penrose Triangle in their work. It creates a strong visual effect and sparks curiosity. M.C. Escher, the Dutch graphic artist, used similar shapes in his drawings. In works like Waterfall, he used impossible structures that seem to rise and fall in ways that don't follow real-world physics. The Penrose Triangle was one of the tools that made this possible. By building a world out of impossible objects, Escher created scenes that challenged the viewer's sense of space and logic. Engineers and builders have also used the triangle as a challenge. Some have built sculptures that look like the Penrose Triangle from a certain angle. These structures use forced perspective. From one fixed viewpoint, the beams seem to join as they do in the drawing. But if you move around the sculpture, the illusion fades. You can see how the parts are actually arranged in space. They are not touching in the way the drawing suggests. Instead, they are shaped and placed carefully to fake the appearance of a closed triangle. The Penrose Triangle also plays a role in cognitive science. It helps researchers study how the brain handles visual information. By examining how people react to impossible shapes, scientists can learn how the mind builds models of the world. These models help us make sense of what we see, but they can be tricked. Illusions like this show that perception is active. It involves judgment and decision-making, not just raw input. In educational settings, the Penrose Triangle can be used to teach geometry and perspective. Students can try to recreate the triangle with paper or sticks and discover why it doesn't work. They can learn about how drawings use perspective to create the illusion of depth and how small changes in line or angle can lead to large changes in meaning. The triangle becomes a tool to explore both art and science. Imagine showing the Penrose Triangle to someone who has never seen it. They look at the drawing and assume it's a real object. They point to the corners and say, "This is one beam joined to another." But if you ask them to trace the triangle with their finger, they pause. They find that the path doesn't work. The beams double back or fail to join. They feel confused, maybe frustrated. That moment is where the illusion does its work. It reveals how much we rely on assumptions when we look at the world. You can even see this shape used in logos and signs. Some companies use the Penrose Triangle to suggest complexity or uniqueness. In these cases, the shape becomes a symbol. It represents something that looks simple but turns out to be much more involved. The triangle captures attention because it feels familiar at first, but strange on closer inspection. In games and virtual environments, designers can create spaces that act like Penrose shapes. A hallway might seem to lead in a loop, or a staircase might rise forever. These tricks use the same logic as the triangle. They control the viewer's point of view and feed the brain just enough clues to build a false space. As long as the player sees the scene from the right angle, the illusion holds. But when the player moves or changes the view, the trick falls apart. The Penrose Triangle is more than a visual curiosity. It's a reminder that what we see is not always what is there. The brain works hard to understand the world, but it can be fooled by the right mix of lines and shading. This shape shows how easily that system can be turned against itself. It invites us to look closely, to question what we think we know, and to enjoy the strange moment when something that looks real turns out to be impossible. The Shepard's Tables illusion shows two tabletops that look completely different in shape and size. One looks long and narrow, like a serving tray. The other looks short and wide, like a square end table. You might guess that one is much longer than the other, or that one is almost twice as wide, but they are exactly the same. The two tabletops have the same shape and size. The illusion makes them look different because of the way they are drawn and the way the brain interprets angles and depth. Roger Shepard, a cognitive scientist, created this illusion to show how easily the brain can be misled. Each tabletop is a simple parallelogram. You can measure the length and width of one, and then do the same with the other, and the numbers will match. But just by changing the way the legs and corners are drawn, the brain sees each tabletop as part of a different three-dimensional object. One seems to stretch far back into space. The other seems to sit flat, close to the viewer. This shift in perspective changes how the brain judges the shape, even though the actual shape stays the same. To see how the illusion works, imagine two rectangular pieces of cardboard. Lay them on a table side by side. They are the same shape and size. Now rotate one of them so it points away from you at an angle. Suddenly it looks longer. The other one still looks wide and close, but you didn't change the cardboard, you only rotated it. The illusion in the Shepard's tables works in a similar way, but instead of rotating real objects, the drawing uses lines and angles to suggest different viewpoints. Each table has legs and corners drawn in a way that adds to the illusion. The long, narrow table has lines that make it look like it's pointing away from you. The shape tricks the brain into seeing depth. The wide, short table has lines that make it seem flat and close. These visual cues tell the brain how to interpret the shapes. The brain believes it's seeing three-dimensional objects, even though the picture is flat. This illusion is strong because the brain uses past experience to judge what it sees. In the real world, shapes get smaller as they go farther away. This is called perspective. It helps the brain figure out distance, size, and depth. When you look at a table in a room, the far edge looks shorter than the near edge. Your brain adjusts for this and gives you a sense of the table's true shape. But when the same adjustment is applied to a flat drawing, it can cause errors. The Shepard's tables image includes cues that suggest perspective, like the legs pointing in different directions and the angles at the corners. The brain treats those cues as signs of depth. It assumes one table is viewed from the side and the other from the end. This changes how the brain interprets the shapes. The brain stretches one and squashes the other, even though both are the same. You can try this at home by printing out the illusion and cutting out the tabletops. Place one cutout over the other. You'll see they match. You can rotate them, line them up, and even trace them. The shape doesn't change, but when you look at them in the original drawing, the illusion comes back. This shows how much the brain depends on context. When the cutouts are by themselves, the brain sees them as flat shapes. When they are in the drawing with legs and angles, the brain switches to seeing them as 3D objects. The illusion also shows something about how the brain handles size. In daily life, the brain has to figure out how big things are, even when their shape on the retina is small. A car far away looks tiny on the eye, but the brain knows it's big. It corrects for distance using cues like perspective, shadows, and angles. In the Shepard's tables, the brain makes the same kind of correction, but there's no real distance. It's all on a flat page, so the correction leads to a wrong answer. One reason this illusion works so well is because it uses shapes we recognize. Tables are familiar objects. The brain has seen them from many angles and knows how they usually look. When it sees the drawing, it quickly decides what kind of object it is seeing. It makes fast guesses about the angle and depth based on past experience. These guesses help you move through the world, but they can lead to mistakes in cases like this. Artists and designers use similar tricks when drawing objects in space. They change line angles, scale, and placement to create the illusion of depth. Architects use perspective drawing to show how a room or building will look from a certain angle. They know how to change the width and angle of lines to give a sense of space. The Shepard's tables illusion takes that idea and uses it to create a conflict between what the eyes see and what the brain believes. This illusion also helps explain why it's hard to judge size in pictures. When you look at a photo, you assume that perspective and angles match the real world. If someone is standing far away in the photo, they look small. Your brain knows they are not really small. But in a drawing, you have fewer clues. You rely even more on line direction and shape. If those clues are arranged in just the right way, your brain makes a wrong guess. You can find similar illusions in other settings. For example, in some room designs, a hallway may look longer or shorter depending on how the floor pattern is drawn. A pattern of angled tiles can create the sense that a hallway stretches farther than it really does. Advertisers and store designers sometimes use these tricks to make spaces feel larger or smaller. They know that your sense of space depends on how you read angles and lines. In studies of visual perception, the Shepard's Tables illusion is used to explore how the brain builds a model of the world. Researchers look at how people respond to the shapes, how long they take to make size judgments, and whether they can learn to correct their mistake. Most people continue to see the illusion even after they are told the truth. This shows that the process happens deep in the brain. It's not a conscious choice. It's a built-in way of interpreting shapes based on experience and rules about space. Children and adults both see the illusion, but the strength of the effect can vary. Some researchers believe that experience plays a role. Adults who have spent more time viewing the world in perspective may be more affected. Children who have not yet learned those rules might see the shapes more as they really are. In cultures where people are less exposed to rectangular rooms and straight-edged furniture, the illusion may be weaker. This suggests that some of the effect is learned over time. The Shepard's Tables illusion is more than a neat trick. It's a clear example of how the brain adds meaning to what the eyes see. It shows that perception is not just about collecting visual data. It's about making sense of it using memory, logic, and pattern recognition. When those mental tools are applied to a flat drawing with the right features, they can produce a result that feels real, but isn't. Even after you understand how the illusion works, it doesn't go away. That's one of the most interesting parts. You can measure the tabletops, overlay them, and prove to yourself they are the same. But when you step back and look at the original drawing, the difference returns. Your brain keeps using the same rules because they usually work. In this case, they don't. And that's what makes the illusion so powerful. It turns a simple pair of shapes into a lasting example of how seeing is not always believing. The rotating snake's illusion is a still image that seems to move. When you look at it, the rings appear to spin, like wheels turning in place. But the picture doesn't move. It's a flat image with no animation. If you stare at one part, the motion slows down or stops. When your eyes shift or blink, the spinning returns. This illusion plays a strong trick on your brain by using color, shape, and the way the eyes take in visual information. The illusion was created by Akiyoshi Kitaoka, a vision scientist from Japan. It uses repeating circular patterns made of colored segments. These segments often include black, white, blue, and yellow, but the colors can vary. Each ring is made up of these colored parts arranged in a specific order. That order is important. The pattern has a kind of twist to it, like a spiral staircase. This twist gives the brain a cue that suggests motion, even when there is none. When you first see the rotating snakes, your eyes scan across the image. You don't stare at one part. Instead, your eyes make small movements called saccades. These movements help the brain gather information from across the visual field. The illusion works best when your eyes move like this. During those movements, the way the brain processes light and contrast can shift slightly. That small delay or mismatch creates the sense that part of the image has moved, even though it hasn't. The image stays still, but the brain gets a false signal that something changed. To get a clearer sense of how this works, imagine looking at a spinning fan. When the blades move fast, they blur. Your brain fills in the gaps and guesses their motion. Now picture an image where the shape and contrast give off the same signals the brain might expect from a spinning fan, but without any real movement. That's what the rotating snakes do. They trick the brain into applying its motion rules to a static pattern. The layout of the colors matters a lot. The typical pattern includes a repeating sequence: dark purple, blue, white, yellow, black. These colors are placed in a circular line, but each segment is rotated slightly. The sharp contrast between the colors creates a strong edge, and the repeated twist gives the illusion of depth and direction. The brain interprets this as motion. When your eyes move, even slightly, the shift in light hitting the retina causes a tiny error in timing. This error is enough to make the pattern appear to rotate. It helps to know that the brain processes color, brightness, and motion in different channels. These systems usually work together to create a full picture of the world. But when certain conditions are met, the systems can send mixed signals. The rotating snake's illusion takes advantage of that. The brain sees changes in brightness and color at the same time in a layout that suggests spinning. The motion channel receives this input and reacts as if the image is moving. If you want to test the illusion, try placing a finger near the edge of one of the rings. Look at your finger instead of the ring. The motion may stop. Now look slightly away from the ring. The spinning returns. You can also try blinking quickly or shifting your gaze from one ring to another. Each time, the movement seems to reset. The illusion is strongest when your eyes are active and weakest when you fixate on one spot. Some people are more sensitive to the effect than others. Factors like lighting, screen brightness, eye fatigue, and even caffeine can affect how strong the illusion feels. In some cases, the effect is so powerful that the rings seem to rotate for several seconds. In others, the movement is faint or hard to see, but once you notice it, it becomes hard to ignore. The rotating snake's illusion is often used in studies of motion perception. It helps researchers understand how the brain handles moving and still images. Scientists can use brain scans to look at what areas become active when people view the illusion. They find that motion-sensitive parts of the brain respond, even though there is no real movement. This shows that the brain is not just reacting to what the eyes see. It's also interpreting and predicting what might happen next. This predictive part of vision plays a big role in everyday life. When you catch a ball, drive a car, or watch someone walk by, your brain stays one step ahead. It guesses what's coming next based on patterns. This helps you react faster than if you waited to see everything in real time. In the case of the rotating snakes, the brain sees a repeating pattern and guesses that it should move. That guess becomes a false perception. You might think of the illusion as a kind of error in the system. But it's really a side effect of how the brain tries to be efficient. Vision takes time. Light enters the eye, hits the retina, and sends signals to the brain. The brain then builds a picture. That process isn't instant, it takes a split second. To keep up with the fast pace of the world, the brain fills in gaps and predicts motion. This usually works well, but in a carefully designed image like the rotating snakes, the prediction goes off target, and motion appears where there is none. Artists and designers have started using this effect in their work. Some create digital art that uses similar patterns to draw attention. Others build murals or paintings that seem to move as you walk past them. These designs use color and layout in ways that echo the same visual rules. By tapping into the motion channels of the brain, they create a living, shifting effect from a still surface. If you print the image and hang it on a wall, the motion still appears. It doesn't need a screen or backlight to work. The key is in the color contrast and the spiral layout. Even a low-quality print can produce the effect. That shows how basic the ingredients of the illusion are. There's no hidden animation or trick photography, just a careful arrangement of shapes and colors that causes the brain to misfire in a predictable way. The rotating snake's illusion is a reminder that what you see is not always what's there. It shows that the brain plays an active role in shaping your visual world. When the image tricks the motion system, you get a false sense of movement. And even when you know it's a trick, the effect stays strong. That tells you something important about how deep these systems run. They aren't easy to override. They operate below the level of thought, guiding your sense of the world second by second. In the case of the rotating snakes, that guidance leads you to see a spinning wheel in a picture that never moves. The Troxler Effect is a visual phenomenon where things in your sight begin to fade when you stare at a single point for a short time. If you fix your eyes on one spot and try not to move them, the shapes or colors around that point can start to disappear. It may seem like they are fading into the background or vanishing completely, but nothing has changed in the image. Your eyes are still open, and the image is still in front of you. The change is happening inside your brain. This effect is named after Ignaz Troxler, a Swiss doctor who first described it in the early 1800s. He noticed that when someone stares at a fixed point without moving their eyes, nearby objects can fade from view. The brain seems to erase or ignore parts of the image. What makes this effect interesting is that it's not caused by lighting or changes in the image itself. It comes from the way your brain handles vision over time. To see the Troxler effect for yourself, try this simple test. Draw a small black dot in the center of a blank sheet of paper. Then, Draw a colored shape like a light blue circle somewhere near the dot, maybe 2 inches away. Hold the paper at eye level and stare at the dot. Keep your eyes still. Don't blink too much, and don't let your gaze wander. After about 10 to 20 seconds, the colored shape may start to fade. It might blur, lose its edges, or disappear altogether. If you blink or shift your eyes, it reappears right away. That's the Troxler Effect in action. Your eyes and brain work together to build your visual experience. Light enters the eye and hits the retina, which sends signals to the brain. The brain then interprets those signals and creates what you see. But vision is not just a snapshot. It's an ongoing process. The brain filters, edits, and sometimes fills in missing parts of what you see. It tries to make sense of the world based on patterns, motion, and change. When something stays the same and doesn't move or change, the brain may decide it's not important. It stops paying attention. The Troxler effect happens because of something called neural adaptation. This is when nerve cells become less responsive to constant, unchanging input. In the case of vision, if your eyes stay fixed and nothing in the image moves, the neurons in your visual system stop firing as strongly. The brain thinks the steady input is no longer useful and fades it out. This helps the brain focus on what's changing or moving, which is usually more important for survival. Think about how this helps in daily life. If you're walking through a busy street, you need to spot moving cars, crossing signals, and people around you. Static details like the cracks in the sidewalk or the bricks in a wall don't change and don't need your focus. The brain filters them out so you can focus on what matters. But in a controlled setting, like staring at a dot on a paper, this filtering makes parts of the image vanish. This effect also shows up in other ways. If you wear glasses and they rest just at the edge of your vision, your brain eventually stops noticing the frames. At first, you might see them clearly. But after a while, you forget they're there. The brain removes them from conscious view. They're still present on your retina, but the brain has decided they're not important enough to notice. The Troxler effect is also more noticeable in peripheral vision. That's the area around the edges of what you're directly looking at. The center of your vision, called the fovea, has the sharpest focus and the most detail, but the areas outside the center are less detailed and more sensitive to movement. When you fix your gaze on one point, the outer areas of your vision stop receiving new or changing input. The brain fills in the blanks or fades the image out. You can explore the Troxler effect online with visual tools made for this purpose. Many of these images have a central dot surrounded by colored patches or patterns. When you stare at the center, the surrounding areas fade away. Some illusions even cause the whole background to disappear. It can feel strange, like your eyes are playing tricks on you, but it's just the brain doing what it always does, trying to filter out noise and focus on useful input. Artists and designers can use this effect to guide attention. If a poster or visual design includes a strong central focus, your brain may naturally ignore the edges if nothing is moving or changing there. The same thing can happen in advertising, where bright motion or sharp contrast at the center grabs your attention, and the rest fades into the background. This helps messages stand out. In medical research, the Troxler effect can also help scientists understand visual disorders. Some conditions affect the brain's ability to filter visual information. People with certain neurological conditions may notice too much or too little in their visual field. Studying how the Troxler effect works in these cases can reveal how visual processing is altered in the brain. There's also a link between the Troxler effect and meditation or stillness. In some meditative practices, people focus their gaze on a candle flame or a fixed point. They report that the world around them begins to soften or vanish. This isn't only a feeling of calm, it may also be a result of the Troxler effect. With the body and eyes still and the gaze fixed, the visual system fades out the unchanging parts of the scene. This gives the impression that the world is slowing down or becoming empty, even though it hasn't changed. The Troxler effect shows how vision is not passive. You don't just see what's in front of you. Your brain decides what to keep and what to ignore. Most of the time, this helps. It keeps you from being overwhelmed by detail. It lets you focus on movement, change, and objects that matter. but it also means that your experience of the world is shaped by what your brain filters out. When you understand how this effect works, it makes you more aware of how much your brain contributes to your perception. You realize that even something as simple as looking at a dot can cause the world around it to fade. You see that the brain edits your experience moment by moment. What you see is only part of the picture. The rest may be there, but your brain has chosen not to show it. The Troxler Effect is one way to glimpse that hidden process. The Lilac Chaser is a visual illusion that uses a simple pattern to create a strange and powerful effect. It shows a ring of lilac-colored circles arranged in a circle on a gray background. One of these circles disappears for a moment, then reappears, and the disappearance moves around the ring in a steady sequence. As you watch, something odd begins to happen. A green dot appears to spin in place of the missing lilac one. But there's no green dot in the image. It's a phantom, something the brain creates. If you keep staring at the center of the circle without moving your eyes, the lilac dots themselves may start to fade until only the green dot remains, spinning on its own. This illusion plays several tricks at once. It involves motion perception, after images, color contrast, and a visual process called filling in. Each of these contributes to what you see or think you see. The Lilac Chaser is a clear example of how the brain doesn't simply show you the world as it is. Instead, it builds an image based on assumptions, patterns, and shortcuts. To understand what's happening, first focus on the motion. The lilac circles disappear one by one in a steady clockwise order. Your brain recognizes this as movement. Even though only one circle disappears at a time, the sequence makes it look like something is moving around the ring. This is called apparent motion. It's the same effect used in flipbooks, movies, and blinking lights on signs. Your brain connects the changes into a smooth path, even if nothing actually moves. Now consider what happens when one of the circles disappears. It's a brief blink, a gap in the ring. But instead of seeing a hole, your brain fills it in with something else, a green dot. This is called a negative afterimage. When you stare at a colored shape for long enough, the cells in your retina that detect that color become less sensitive. They adapt. When the shape disappears, the adapted cells stop firing, but other cells are still active. The brain interprets this imbalance as the opposite color. In the case of lilac, the complementary color is green. So when a lilac circle disappears, your eyes and brain produce a green afterimage in its place. That green spot looks like it's real, but it's only the brain's response to color fatigue. As the missing circle moves, so does the afterimage. It follows the path of disappearance, creating the illusion of a green dot rotating around the ring. This illusion also shows the brain's use of filling in. When you fix your eyes on the center of the ring and hold your gaze still, the outer lilac circles may start to vanish. You're not blinking or looking away, but the lilac dots begin to fade. This happens because the brain starts to ignore unchanging parts of the scene. If nothing moves and the eye doesn't shift, the brain considers the input less important. It fills in the area with the background color, which is usually gray in this illusion. This fading is more likely to happen in your peripheral vision, the area outside the center of your gaze. The peripheral areas are less detailed and more prone to adaptation. When the brain sees no motion or change in those areas, it may stop paying attention to them. That's why, in this illusion, the lilac circles disappear from view. At the same time, the green dot seems to stand out even more, since it's linked to a constantly changing part of the image. You can test this by shifting your gaze away from the center. Look directly at the green dot or at one of the lilac circles. The illusion weakens or disappears. The lilac circles return. The green dot fades. That's because your eyes are no longer fixed, and the steady input that caused adaptation is broken. This proves that the illusion depends on stillness and time. A simple way to try the Lilac Chaser yourself is to look it up online. Many websites feature a version of it. You'll see a dozen lilac circles in a ring and one vanishing at a time. Stare at the central cross and watch the illusion take hold. If you let your eyes wander, the effect breaks. But if you stay still, you'll see the phantom green dot and the fading lilac shapes. The Lilac Chaser combines at least 3 known visual processes: the Phi Phenomenon, which explains apparent motion, negative afterimages, and Troxler fading, which describes how unchanging stimuli in the peripheral vision fade from awareness. Each of these processes has been studied on its own, but the Lilac Chaser brings them together in one image. This makes it a useful tool for researchers who study how the brain builds the visual world. The illusion also raises questions about how reliable vision is. Most of the time, we think of seeing as a direct process. We open our eyes, light enters, and we see what's out there. But the Lilac Chaser shows that vision is not only about input, it's also about processing. The brain edits and adjusts what it receives. It tries to be efficient. It focuses on motion, change, and contrast, because these often carry the most useful information. Artists and designers often use these ideas to guide attention. They know that still images can seem dynamic if they play with color and contrast in the right way. A smart choice of color pairings can create the illusion of glow, depth, or motion. Advertisements, signs, and user interfaces may borrow these visual principles, not to fool the viewer, but to direct the eye where it needs to go. The Lilac Chaser also helps explain why visual fatigue can affect how we see color. When you look at a red image for a long time and then look away, you may see a green afterimage. This is not just a trick, it's the result of sensory adaptation. The brain always adjusts its sensitivity to keep vision balanced. This same system, meant to help us adapt to different lighting or detect changes, can be tricked by repeating patterns and fixed gaze. In real-world settings, these effects may go unnoticed because the eyes are always moving. Even small, involuntary movements called microsaccades help refresh the image on the retina. They prevent fading and help maintain clarity. But in an illusion like the Lilac Chaser, the setup encourages stillness. You focus on the center. You stop moving your eyes. That's when the illusion comes alive. Your brain, expecting to see lilac circles and no green, instead shows you the opposite. It makes motion from stillness and creates color where there is none. Some variations of the Lilac Chaser experiment with the color of the dots or the speed of the sequence. Changing the color can alter the phantom color that appears. If you use blue instead of lilac, the phantom may be orange. If you change the timing, the illusion may speed up or weaken. These changes help researchers study the timing of visual adaptation and how different color systems in the brain react over time. This illusion does not depend on any tricks in the image itself. There is no actual green light, no animation, no fading built into the graphic. Everything that happens, from the spinning dot to the fading shapes, happens inside the viewer's brain. That makes the Lilac Chaser both simple and complex. It's a flat image with only a few parts, but it causes a strong and surprising reaction because of how vision works. What seems like motion, color, and disappearance is really a result of neural patterns, timing, and perception. The Kanizsa Triangle is a well-known optical illusion that shows how the brain can see something that isn't actually there. In the image, you see the clear shape of a white triangle. It seems to sit on top of 3 black circles and 3 black angles arranged around it. The white triangle looks solid and bright, like it's blocking part of the shapes beneath it. But if you look closely, you'll notice that no triangle is actually drawn. There are no lines forming the triangle's edges. There's no shape filled in with white, yet most people still see it as a complete triangle. This is a clear case of the brain filling in missing information. The illusion was created by Gaetano Kanizsa, an Italian psychologist who studied perception. He was interested in how people organize visual scenes and make sense of incomplete images. This triangle is one of the simplest and strongest examples of what he called illusory contours. These are edges or borders that the brain sees, even though they aren't really there. The basic setup of the Kanizsa Triangle uses 3 black Pac-Man-like shapes, called inducers. They are simple circles with a wedge removed, like a slice taken out of a pie. These wedges face inward and form the 3 points of an invisible triangle. Around the outside are 3 V-shaped angles, or chevrons, that also line up in a way that supports the shape of a triangle. When you look at the whole image, your brain connects these pieces and fills in a triangle that doesn't exist on the page. What's happening here is the brain using its natural ability to group elements together. This is part of something called Gestalt psychology. Gestalt principles describe how people naturally organize visual information into patterns. One of these principles is closure. which says that the brain tends to fill in gaps to create whole objects. Another principle is good continuation, which means the brain prefers smooth, continuous lines and shapes. These principles explain why you see a triangle in the Kanizsa image. The brain uses the positions of the wedges and angles as clues and finishes the job by imagining the full triangle. This ability helps in everyday life. The world is full of partial views and overlapping objects. When you walk through a crowded room or drive down a busy street, you don't see every object in full. You see parts of things. A cup might be partly blocked by a plate. A car might be behind a fence. Your brain fills in the rest so you can make quick sense of what's there. The Kanizsa Triangle shows this process in a clear, controlled way. The brain fills in a simple shape based on very limited visual cues. One reason the illusion is strong is that the white triangle seems brighter than the background, even though it's the same color as the background. This is called brightness contrast. Your brain assumes the triangle is a separate shape sitting on top of the other elements, and so it boosts the brightness to make it stand out. This shows that the brain doesn't just process what's physically present, it adds meaning based on context. To test the illusion for yourself, try covering part of the image. Use a piece of paper to block one of the Pac-Man shapes or one of the angles. You'll notice that the triangle becomes harder to see. If you block enough of the image, the triangle disappears. This shows that the illusion depends on having enough visual cues. Without the inducers, the brain has no reason to fill in a triangle. You can also rotate the image or rearrange the parts. If the wedges face outward instead of inward, the triangle no longer forms. If the angles don't line up, the illusion breaks. This shows how sensitive the brain is to alignment and spacing. A small change in angle or position can change what we perceive entirely. The Kanizsa Triangle also raises questions about what it means to see something. Is the triangle real? It's not drawn. There's no line, no color, no texture, but people still report seeing it. That's because seeing isn't just detecting light. It's interpreting shapes, edges, and patterns. The triangle exists in perception, even if it doesn't exist on the page. Artists often use similar ideas to suggest shapes and forms without drawing them completely. A painter might leave gaps in a figure, but arrange the strokes so your brain still sees a person. A photographer might frame part of a subject and let the viewer complete the rest. These techniques rely on the same principles behind the Kanizsa Triangle, using the brain's need for closure and structure. Designers and advertisers also use this type of illusion. Logos often use negative space to suggest shapes or letters. The brain fills in the blanks automatically. This creates a strong, memorable image while using less detail. The illusion shows that sometimes what's not there is just as important as what is. Researchers use the Kanizsa Triangle to study how early the brain processes visual information. Brain scans show that people respond to the illusory edges in the same way they respond to real edges. Even though no lines exist, the visual cortex activates as if they do. This means the brain isn't just reacting to input, it's actively constructing what we see. That construction happens fast and early, often before we're even aware of it. The triangle also helps scientists learn about disorders of perception. In some neurological conditions, people may not see the triangle or may not experience the illusion in the usual way. Studying these differences helps researchers understand how the brain's visual system works and what happens when it's disrupted. In education, the Kanizsa Triangle is used to teach students about perception, brain function, and art. It's simple to draw and easy to demonstrate, yet it opens the door to deep questions about vision and reality. It shows how our experience of the world is not only based on what we see, but also on how the brain decides to see it. The triangle illusion can be expanded into other shapes. You can make Kanizsa squares, circles, or other polygons using similar inducers. As long as the clues are strong enough, the brain will fill in the shape. This flexibility shows that the illusion isn't tied to one image. It reflects a general process that the brain uses all the time. In everyday scenes, you rely on this process without thinking. When a tablecloth folds, you assume the pattern continues underneath. When a tree branch blocks part of a building, you still recognize the building behind it. The brain completes shapes to maintain a stable view of the world. The Kanizsa Triangle strips that process down to its basics and shows it happening in plain sight. Even though the image is flat and simple, the brain adds layers to it. It adds shape, brightness, and depth. It turns scattered pieces into a whole. And it does this so naturally that most people don't even realize it's an illusion. They see the triangle, not the parts that suggest it. That's the power of the Kanizsa Triangle. It shows how much of what we see is created in the mind, not just delivered by the eyes. The McGurk Effect is a clear example of how vision and hearing work together when you understand speech. It shows that what you see can change what you hear. This effect occurs when the sound of one syllable is paired with the video of someone speaking a different syllable. What you end up hearing is often something else entirely. The brain combines the sound and the visual cues from the speaker's mouth and creates a new perception that doesn't match the actual sound. To see how this works, imagine a person saying the syllable ba. You hear the sound ba, and you see their lips move in a way that matches that sound. Now imagine that same ba sound being played again, but this time, the video shows someone moving their mouth as if they are saying fa. Your ears still hear ba, but your eyes see fa. In many cases, your brain will make a compromise between the two, and you will hear da or tha. This new sound doesn't match the audio or the video exactly. It's a blend created by the brain as it tries to make sense of conflicting information. The McGurk Effect was first described in the 1970s by Harry McGurk and John MacDonald. They were studying how children learn language and noticed that the visual part of speech, watching someone's lips, can affect how the sound is heard. They found that even when the actual sound stays the same, changing the speaker's lip movements can change what people think they hear. This happens because the brain does not process sound and sight in isolation. Instead, it combines signals from different senses to make a best guess about what is happening. In daily life, this multisensory approach helps you understand speech in noisy places or when someone speaks softly. Watching someone's lips move can make it easier to understand them. The McGurk Effect shows that this system can also be fooled. To test the effect yourself, you can find many examples online. One common version uses the syllables ba and fa. If you close your eyes and listen, you'll hear ba. If you watch the video with sound, you may start to hear fa or even da, depending on how your brain processes the conflicting signals. Some people hear the changed sound right away. Others need to see the clip more than once. Some people don't hear the illusion at all, but that's less common. Not everyone experiences the McGurk Effect in the same way. Some people are more sensitive to visual information, while others rely more on hearing. Your language background can also affect how strongly you experience the effect. In some studies, speakers of different languages show different responses. For example, people who grow up speaking a language where mouth shape and visual cues are important for distinguishing sounds may rely more on what they see. The effect also depends on how closely the visual and audio parts match in time. If the video is delayed or out of sync, the illusion is weaker. The brain expects the sound and mouth movements to line up. When they do, the brain assumes they are part of the same event and merges them. This merging is what causes the effect. When the audio and video are clearly separate, the brain may not combine them, and you hear the correct sound. The McGurk Effect helps explain why it can be hard to understand someone when you can't see their face. Talking on the phone, for example, removes visual cues. In noisy places, being able to see someone's lips can make a big difference in how well you understand them. This is especially true for people who are hard of hearing or who rely on lip reading. Their brains are trained to use every available cue to interpret speech, so they may be even more aware of how sight affects sound. In education and communication, understanding the McGurk Effect can help people speak more clearly and use both sight and sound effectively. Teachers, public speakers, and broadcasters can use this knowledge to support better understanding. For example, when speaking to a group, facing the audience and speaking at a steady pace allows people to see the speaker's mouth and match what they hear to what they see. This can reduce confusion and improve clarity. The effect also matters in the design of technology. Video calls, online meetings, and voice recognition software all rely on accurate speech perception. When audio and video fall out of sync, it not only feels wrong, it can also lead to errors in what people think they heard. Developers need to make sure audio and video are aligned so that the brain receives consistent input. The McGurk effect is also used in research to study how the brain processes language and how different areas of the brain work together. Scientists can use brain imaging tools to see what happens when someone experiences the effect. They find that areas of the brain responsible for hearing are active, but so are areas that process vision and integrate the two. This shows that speech perception is not limited to the ears. It is a whole brain activity. One real-world example of the McGurk effect is in dubbing films. If the actor's mouth movements don't match the spoken words, it can confuse the viewer. Even if the audio is clear, the mismatch can create an odd effect. The viewer's brain may try to blend the audio with the visual and end up with a distorted sense of what is being said. This is one reason why good lip syncing is important in translated or dubbed media. You can also notice a kind of reverse McGurk effect when watching someone speak in a noisy environment. Imagine being at a concert or a party where there is loud background noise. You may not hear the speaker well, but you can still see their mouth. Your brain uses the visual input to help fill in the gaps in sound. In this case, what you see supports what you hear, instead of changing it. But the idea is the same. Vision shapes your experience of sound. Some people might think that seeing should not affect hearing, but the McGurk effect proves that this isn't how perception works. Your brain is always trying to understand what is happening around you using all available input. It doesn't treat sound and sight as separate streams. Instead, it blends them into a single experience. Most of the time, this blending helps you understand the world better. But in special cases, like the McGurk effect, the blending leads to a new perception that doesn't match either the sound or the image alone. This effect helps explain why communication is richer when you can see the speaker. It's not just about reading facial expressions. The movement of the mouth and jaw gives key clues that shape what you hear. The McGurk effect shows that this process happens without effort. You don't have to try to match the audio and video. Your brain does it automatically, and what you hear changes as a result. If you ever find yourself watching a speaker on a screen and thinking their voice sounds off, or like they're saying something different, it might not be a bad recording. It might be your brain trying to make sense of mixed messages. The McGurk effect reminds us that what we hear depends on more than just sound. It depends on the full picture, what we see, what we expect, and how the brain puts those pieces together. The Shepard tone is a sound illusion that creates the effect of a pitch that keeps rising forever, but never actually gets any higher. It's like listening to a staircase of notes that loops back on itself in a way that sounds smooth and endless. You keep expecting the tone to peak or shift, but it doesn't. The illusion makes it feel like the sound is always climbing, yet it never reaches a limit. This effect can also be reversed to sound like a pitch that is always falling, endlessly dropping without ever landing. The Shepard tone is named after Roger Shepard, a psychologist who studied auditory perception. He developed this illusion to show how the brain can be tricked by carefully layered sounds. It works because of the way we process pitch and tone, and how we use patterns to make sense of what we hear. The tone is built from several sine waves, simple tones that each have a clean pitch and no extra overtones. These sine waves are spaced an octave apart. In music, an octave is a doubling of frequency. If one tone is 200 Hz, the tone an octave above it is 400 Hz, and the one above that is 800 Hz. These tones are layered so that you hear several at once, each rising in pitch together. But there's more to it. While all the tones rise, their volumes also change. The highest pitched tones fade out as they get louder, and new low-pitched tones fade in quietly. The listener doesn't notice this change because it happens gradually. The overlapping tones make it feel like a single pitch is rising. Your brain connects the notes and hears a smooth climb. But in reality, the pattern is looping. One tone fades out, another fades in, and the cycle starts again. It's similar to the way you might see a barber pole or a rotating spiral. The stripes seem to move upward forever, even though they are simply going around in a loop. The motion feels infinite, but the actual motion is bounded. The Shepard tone works the same way, but with sound instead of sight. You can experience this illusion by listening to a Shepard tone audio clip. As you listen, it sounds like a note is going higher and higher. You might brace yourself for a sudden jump or expect the sound to break, but it doesn't. The rise continues without a peak. The illusion works even better when used with visual cues, like a spinning wheel or an object rising up a screen. The brain links the rising sound with the visual motion, and the combination feels even stronger. Composers and sound designers use Shepard tones in movies and video games to create tension or a sense of urgency. One well-known example is in the film Dunkirk, where the rising tone builds stress during scenes of suspense. The tone never resolves, so the audience never relaxes. It creates a feeling that something is coming or that time is running out. Video games sometimes use Shepard tones when a player is climbing or being chased. The illusion makes it feel like you're always ascending, even if the game's music is looping. To understand how the Shepard tone works in more detail, picture a piano keyboard. Each key plays a note, and each note has a frequency. If you play a series of notes going up by half steps, you create a rising scale. Normally, when you get to the top of the keyboard, the notes stop rising. You reach the limit of the instrument. But with Shepard tones, the notes are layered and managed so that the rise never ends. It's like playing the top and bottom of the keyboard at the same time and blending them in a way that the transitions are hidden. This blending happens through something called amplitude modulation. The volume of each note changes over time. As one note rises in pitch and volume, it reaches a point where it starts to fade. Another note, an octave lower, is faded in to take its place. Because these transitions happen smoothly, the listener doesn't notice the change. The brain hears a consistent rise. There's also a version of the illusion called the Shepard reset glissando. Instead of using discrete notes, it uses a smooth slide in pitch. This glide effect makes the illusion even more seamless. It feels like a tone is sliding upward forever without ever stepping between notes. Jean-Claude Risset, a composer and researcher, developed this variation to create continuous rising or falling sounds. It's often used in music or sound design when a sense of infinite movement is needed. These illusions work because of the brain's tendency to organize sound into patterns. When we hear rising tones, we expect them to resolve, either by reaching a peak or changing direction. When that doesn't happen, the brain continues to track the rise, unaware that it's being fed a repeating pattern. The illusion depends on our natural way of making sense of pitch. We group rising tones together and assume they form a logical progression. But in the case of the Shepard tone, the logic is false. You can build a simple Shepard tone using sound software or a synthesizer. Start with 3 or 4 sine waves spaced an octave apart. Program them to rise together and adjust their volume so that the highest one fades out as it climbs and the lowest one fades in from the bottom. Loop this process and you'll hear the illusion take shape. Fine-tuning the timing and volume curves is key to making the tone feel seamless. If the transitions are too sharp, the loop becomes obvious and the effect breaks. The illusion also teaches us something about how we respond to sound in real life. We use pitch to judge size, speed, and motion. A rising pitch might suggest something getting closer or something speeding up. A falling pitch might suggest slowing down or moving away. In speech, pitch helps convey emotion and emphasis. The Shepard tone uses these pitch cues in a way that stretches them beyond their usual limits. The result is something that feels familiar but behaves in an unnatural way. Because the illusion works at a deep perceptual level, it can affect mood and attention. When used carefully, it can create suspense, curiosity, or unease. It can also be used to add a sense of motion where none exists. That's why it works well in storytelling and interactive media. It supports the feeling of rising action, even if the scene or situation isn't changing that much. The Shepard tone is one of several auditory illusions that show how the brain constructs what we hear. Just like visual illusions can show us false motion or shapes that don't exist, sound illusions can reveal how we piece together tones, rhythms, and patterns. In all these cases, the brain makes choices based on rules it has learned from experience. Most of the time, those choices lead to accurate understanding. But in certain conditions, like those created by the Shepard tone, those same rules lead us to a different and false conclusion. The tone itself is simple. It's just a set of repeating frequencies. But how the brain responds to it, how it hears a rising tone that never ends, is what makes the illusion powerful. It proves that what we hear is shaped not only by sound itself, but by how we expect sounds to behave. The Shepard tone plays with that expectation and turns it into something endless. The phantom words illusion is a sound illusion where your brain creates meaning from repeated noise. It happens when a short pattern of spoken sounds plays over and over again. At first, you hear what sounds like random syllables or chopped up speech. But as the sounds keep repeating, you start to hear words. Sometimes the words are clear, sometimes they shift. You might hear different words than someone else listening at the same time. The sounds themselves never change. What changes is how your brain interprets them. This illusion was created by psychologist Diana Deutsch. She studies how people hear and understand sound. In her version of the illusion, a short phrase like, "Why do you?" is spoken and played on a loop. Each loop shifts slightly between the left and right ear, so the sounds bounce from one side to the other. At first, it sounds like a blur. Then your brain starts trying to make sense of it. You might suddenly hear the phrase, "I do," or "Why you," or something completely different, like "ride you" or "wide shoe." Someone else listening to the same clip at the same time might hear "my juice" or "white chew." There is no correct answer. Everyone hears something different because the brain is doing its best to find a pattern in repeated sound. The illusion shows how the brain creates meaning when there is no clear signal. Speech is full of patterns and rhythms. The brain expects to find words, so when it hears something that resembles speech, even if it's incomplete or unclear, it tries to fill in the gaps. This process is usually helpful. It helps you understand someone talking in a noisy room. It helps you catch what someone means, even if they mumble or misspeak. But in the case of the phantom words illusion, this helpful system creates something that's not there. To try the illusion yourself, you can find audio clips online. Put on headphones and play the clip. It might begin with nonsense, but after a few seconds, your brain will start pulling words from the pattern. Sometimes the words seem to pop out clearly. Sometimes they shift. You may hear one word at first and then suddenly hear a different one. This change can happen even if you don't stop or restart the audio. The clip stays the same, but what you hear doesn't. This shifting perception happens because of repetition and ambiguity. The clip repeats the same sounds, but they aren't fully clear. They sit on the edge of recognizability. That gives your brain a chance to decide what it hears. Once a word pops out, your brain locks onto it and treats it like a real sound. But because the audio never actually changes, a different interpretation is always possible. This is why the illusion can change even while you're listening. It also shows how fragile speech perception can be. When the sound signal is strong and clear, the brain has no trouble. But when the signal is weak or repeated without context, the brain takes over. It makes guesses and tries to create something familiar. This works surprisingly well, but sometimes it leads to false hearing. In daily life, that might cause misunderstandings. In the lab, it becomes a way to study the brain's creative side. You can even create your own version of the illusion. Record a short phrase with soft syllables like, "Why do you?" or "No way out." Play it in a loop and pan the sound between the left and right ear. Keep the rhythm steady. Listen with headphones. Over time, different people will hear different words. You might hear something new each time you play it. The sound doesn't change, but the brain keeps finding new meaning in it. That's the power of the illusion. What the phantom words illusion makes clear is that hearing is not just about the ears. It's about how the brain organizes sound into speech, and how that speech is shaped by memory, context, and repetition. The illusion is simple, just a few sounds repeated, but it shows how easily the brain turns sound into meaning, even when no real words are there. The illusion depends on suggestion and attention. If someone tells you what to listen for, you're more likely to hear that. For example, if someone says, "Listen for I do," your brain may focus on the syllables that match those sounds. The rest fades into the background. But if someone else says, "Do you hear my shoe?" you may suddenly hear that instead. The same sound clip can support many different interpretations, and the brain will favor the one it thinks fits best. This effect shows up in daily life more than you might think. In a loud room, you might mishear what someone says and think you heard something else. That's your brain filling in a pattern. If the sentence is unclear, your brain uses context to guess. Sometimes that guess is wrong, and you hear a word that wasn't spoken. That's not just a mistake, it's a version of the phantom words illusion. The brain always tries to make incomplete speech meaningful. Most of the time it helps, but sometimes it creates errors. The phantom words illusion also shows how personal experience shapes perception. Two people can hear the same sound but report different words. One person might hear something emotional or strange, while another hears something simple and neutral. That difference comes from each person's mental vocabulary, past experiences, and expectations. If you've just been talking about food, you might hear "my juice." If you've been thinking about work, you might hear "I do." The brain grabs onto the idea that feels most relevant. This kind of top-down processing is common in both hearing and seeing. It means the brain doesn't just passively take in information. It actively interprets it based on what it expects, what it knows, and what it wants to find. The phantom words illusion highlights this because the input is fixed, but the experience is not. The brain brings something to the sound that isn't there in the audio. Musicians and sound designers sometimes use this illusion to create textures in sound. By layering voices or phrases in a repeating pattern, they can encourage the brain to find new rhythms or hidden words. Some experimental music does this on purpose, giving the listener something repetitive and ambiguous, then letting the brain do the work of interpretation. The result is different for every person. In research, the phantom words illusion helps scientists study how language works in the brain. It shows how sound gets mapped to meaning, how repetition influences hearing, and how attention shifts what we notice. Some studies test how people's word recognition changes when they are tired, distracted, or under stress. Others look at how different languages shape what people hear. A person who speaks one language might hear different phantom words than someone who speaks another. The illusion becomes a tool to explore how deeply language knowledge is tied to perception. The Yanny or Laurel illusion is a short audio clip that plays a single word. But when people hear it, they don't all agree on what that word is. Some people hear Yanny, others hear Laurel. The sound does not change between listens. The clip stays the same, yet people report different words. This caused a wide debate when the clip first appeared online. People were surprised that two people could hear such different things from the same sound. It made people wonder how something so simple could cause so much disagreement. But the explanation is rooted in how the human brain processes sound, especially speech. The Yanny or Laurel audio comes from a vocabulary recording. The original word was Laurel, taken from a pronunciation guide. The voice in the clip says the word clearly, but when it was re-recorded or filtered, something unexpected happened. Certain frequencies in the sound were either removed, reduced, or boosted. The result is a sound that sits on a kind of perceptual boundary. Depending on what part of the sound spectrum your ears and brain focus on, you may hear one word or the other. To understand how this works, you need to know a little about how speech is made up. Every word is not just one sound, but a mix of many frequencies. When someone says Laurel, the voice produces vibrations at several pitches at once. These frequencies stack together to form a pattern that the brain recognizes as a word. The same thing happens when someone says Yanny, but the pattern of frequencies is different. In this illusion, the sound contains elements of both Laurel and Yanny, just in different parts of the frequency range. The key part of the illusion is how your brain picks out which part of the sound to focus on. If you hear mostly the low frequencies, you're more likely to hear Laurel. If your ears or your audio device emphasizes higher frequencies, you may hear Yanny. That's because the Yanny part of the sound is in the higher pitch range, while Laurel sits lower. This shift can happen because of the settings on your headphones, the quality of your speakers, or your own hearing sensitivity. Age also plays a role. As people get older, they tend to lose the ability to hear high frequencies. Someone younger might hear Yanny because they can pick up the high-pitched sounds more clearly. Someone older might hear Laurel because their hearing focuses more on the lower end of the spectrum. This age-related hearing change is normal, and it helps explain why people in the same room can listen to the same clip and come away with different words. You can test this yourself by playing with audio settings. If you take the original clip and filter out the low frequencies, more people will hear Yanny. If you remove the high frequencies, Laurel becomes more dominant. You can also slow the clip down. Sometimes, slowing it can make one version clearer than the other. These tests show that the clip contains the sound cues for both words. Which one you hear depends on how your brain sorts the sound. The brain doesn't process sound in a neutral way. It's always making choices. It picks out patterns that match known speech sounds. It uses past experience, context, and even expectations to decide what word you're hearing. That's why once you hear one version, it can be hard to switch. Your brain locks in the pattern and sticks with it. But if you focus and try to hear the other version, sometimes it will shift. Once you hear both, you may find the sound bouncing between Yanny and Laurel with each new listen. This kind of illusion is not new. There are other examples in sound that work the same way. One well-known case is the green needle, or brainstorm illusion. In that clip, a sound is played on a loop. What you hear depends on what you expect. If you think of the word green needle, you might hear that. If you think of the word brainstorm, your brain may line up the sound with that word instead. The sound itself doesn't change, but your perception does. These illusions work because speech is full of ambiguity. The brain uses all available clues to decide what's being said. In the Yanny or Laurel case, the lack of context makes the illusion stronger. If you saw a person speaking the word, your brain could use visual cues to figure it out. If you had a full sentence, the brain would use grammar or meaning to choose the most likely word. But the clip is isolated. It's just one word, played without visual or sentence context. That leaves the brain to rely only on sound. And when the sound includes parts of two different words, the result is split perception. The Yanny or Laurel illusion also shows how much variation there is in how people hear. Two people with normal hearing can hear the same clip differently and both be right in their own way. That challenges the idea that hearing is fixed or objective. In many cases, what you hear depends not just on the sound, but on how your ears and brain interact with it. That makes hearing more of a personal experience than most people realize. This illusion also spread so widely because of its simplicity. It's just one word, played once with no tricks added. That made it easy for anyone to try. And when people disagreed on what they heard, it created surprise and curiosity. It's not often that such a simple sound can divide people so clearly. The debate drew attention from scientists, musicians, speech experts, and the general public. Everyone wanted to understand how something so ordinary could lead to such different results. In classrooms, this illusion helps teachers explain how sound works. It gives students a way to explore pitch, frequency, and perception without needing complex tools. In speech science, it shows how flexible and adaptive the hearing system is. In audio engineering, it highlights the role of equipment and filtering in shaping what we hear. And in daily life, it reminds people that perception is not just about input, it's also about interpretation. What's most interesting is how strongly people feel about what they hear. Some listeners insist they hear Yanny, no matter how many times they listen. Others say it's clearly Laurel, and can't imagine how anyone hears it differently. That's because once the brain locks onto a sound pattern, it becomes very stable. The brain expects to hear the same thing again, and it does. Only a shift in frequency or a focused effort to hear something new can change it. The Yanny or Laurel illusion is simple, but it reveals a lot about how the brain turns sound into speech. It shows that perception is active, not passive. It involves choice, context, and pattern matching. The clip itself is just a vibration in the air. What the listener hears depends on how those vibrations are processed, filtered, and understood. That process, though automatic, is shaped by many factors: age, hearing range, expectations, and even the sound system used to play the clip. This illusion is a clear case where sound perception is not one size fits all. It shows that hearing, like vision, is not just about what's out there. It's about what the brain decides to bring into awareness. And in the case of Yanny or Laurel, the decision isn't always the same. Binaural beats are a sound illusion created when you play two slightly different tones into each ear. Your brain hears a third tone that isn't actually there. This third tone is the beat. It's not produced by the speakers or headphones, and you can't measure it with a microphone. The sound exists only in your brain. The effect happens because of the way the brain handles sound from each ear and tries to combine the signals into a single experience. To create a binaural beat, you need stereo headphones. You play one tone in the left ear and a different tone in the right ear. The tones must be close in pitch but not the same. For example, if the left ear hears a tone at 200 Hz and the right ear hears a tone at 210 Hz, your brain perceives a beat at 10 Hz. That beat isn't a real sound wave. It's the difference between the two tones. Your ears never hear a 10 Hz tone. Your brain creates the sensation of a pulsing rhythm at that rate. This happens because of how the brain processes sound from both ears. The auditory system doesn't just take in sounds separately from each side. It also compares the signals to figure out things like direction and timing. When the two tones are close together, the brain notices the mismatch and tries to resolve it. It ends up creating a perception of a rhythmic beat equal to the frequency difference. You can think of this effect like a visual illusion, where lines or colors make you see movement that isn't there. Binaural beats do the same thing with sound. The tones don't create a beat in the air, but the brain turns them into one. This is different from what happens with physical beats, which are created when two sounds combine in the same space. For example, if you play a 200 Hz tone and a 210 Hz tone from two speakers into the same room, the sound waves interfere with each other and create a real 10 Hz beat in the air. With binaural beats, that interference doesn't happen in the air, it happens in your brain. To test this, try listening to a binaural beat track with one earbud out. You'll hear just a steady tone. There's no beat. Now put both earbuds in. The beat returns. That's because the illusion only works when both ears receive the tones at the same time, and each ear hears a different frequency. The effect is most noticeable with frequencies below 1000 Hz and differences below 30 Hz. If the tones are too far apart in frequency, the brain processes them as separate sounds. The beat disappears. If the tones are too high in pitch, the brain has a harder time matching them. So binaural beats are usually created using low tones and small differences. People often group binaural beats into ranges that match known brainwave patterns. These include delta, 1 to 4 Hz, theta, 4 to 8 Hz, alpha, 8 to 14 Hz, beta, 14 to 30 Hz, and gamma, above 30 Hz. These ranges are named after patterns of electrical activity in the brain measured with EEG machines. Some people believe that listening to binaural beats can change your brain activity to match the beat frequency. For example, they might use a 10 Hz beat to match the alpha range, which is linked to relaxed wakefulness. Or they might use a 4 Hz beat to match the theta range, which is associated with drowsiness or meditation. There is some research into this idea, but the results are mixed. Some studies show changes in mood or focus when people listen to binaural beats in certain ranges. Others show little or no effect. What's clear is that binaural beats can cause the brain to notice a difference and sometimes respond to it. But whether that response leads to consistent changes in brainwaves or behavior is still an open question. The experience of listening to binaural beats varies from person to person. Some people report feeling relaxed, alert, or focused. Others feel no effect at all. The illusion itself is subtle. The beat is usually quiet and sits in the background. If you aren't listening closely, you might not notice it. It doesn't sound like a strong drum beat. It's more like a gentle pulse that fades in and out, shaped by the tones that create it. You can create binaural beats yourself using tone generators or audio software. You just need to generate 2 sine waves with a small frequency difference and pan one to the left and the other to the right. For example, to create a 6 Hz beat, you could use a 200 Hz tone in one ear and a 206 Hz tone in the other. Listen through headphones and the beat should appear. You can also layer the tones under soft music or ambient sounds to make them more pleasant. Some apps and audio tracks are designed to deliver binaural beats for specific effects like sleep, meditation, or studying. These usually include a pair of tones plus background noise or music. They often claim to guide your brain into certain states by matching the beat frequency to a brainwave range. While the science behind these claims is still being tested, the illusion itself is real. The brain does hear a beat that isn't present in the audio signal. One important thing to note is that binaural beats require headphones. If you play the tones through speakers in the same room, both ears hear both tones, and the illusion doesn't work. The brain needs to receive the different frequencies in each ear separately. That's why stereo separation is key. Without it, the brain can't create the beat. The effect also depends on attention. If you're focused on the sound, you're more likely to notice the beat. If you're distracted or doing something else, the illusion may fade into the background. This is part of how the brain filters sensory input. It highlights what seems important and ignores what doesn't. So even though the tones are playing, your experience of the beat may come and go depending on how much attention you give it. People sometimes compare binaural beats to other auditory illusions like the Shepard tone or the McGurk effect. But binaural beats are unique because they rely on stereo input and brain processing, not sound wave interference or visual context. They give a direct look into how the brain combines input from both ears to create a single sense of hearing. The illusion also helps explain how the brain locates sound in space. Normally, the brain uses the tiny difference in time and pitch between sounds arriving at each ear to figure out where a sound is coming from. Binaural beats show how sensitive the brain is to small differences in frequency. A 10 Hz difference between tones is enough to create a new perception entirely. This sensitivity is part of what makes hearing so precise in daily life. You can also think of binaural beats as a tool for learning about auditory perception. They show that what we hear is not just the sum of the sounds hitting our ears. It's the result of the brain working to make sense of those sounds. In the case of binaural beats, the brain adds something extra, a beat that doesn't exist in the world but feels just as real as the tones that do. This illusion doesn't rely on suggestion or expectation. You don't have to be told what to hear. The beat appears as a natural result of how the brain processes the tones. That makes it a clear and simple example of how perception works, not as a direct copy of the outside world, but as something shaped by the brain's structure and function. Listening to binaural beats is like watching the brain do its job in real time. It reveals just how active your mind is, even when you think you're only hearing sound. The Tritone Paradox is a sound illusion where two tones are played one after the other, and people disagree about whether the second tone goes up in pitch or down. Some people hear a rising sound, others hear a falling sound. Both groups are listening to the exact same audio. The tones never change, yet the direction people hear feels completely different. This illusion surprises many listeners because we usually agree on whether a sound is going up or down in pitch. But with the Tritone Paradox, perception splits, and there's no clear reason why. The illusion uses a pair of tones separated by a musical interval called a tritone. In Western music, a tritone is half an octave, or 6 semitones. It sounds dissonant or tense, and it falls right in the middle of the musical scale. The two tones used in the Tritone Paradox are not just pure notes, they are Shepard tones. A Shepard tone is a complex sound made up of several tones layered an octave apart. These tones fade in and out at the high and low ends, so the middle frequency sounds strongest. The result is a tone that seems to sit within a specific pitch range but lacks clear cues for whether it's high or low. When one Shepard tone plays, followed by another exactly 6 semitones away, your brain tries to decide if the second tone is higher or lower than the first. But the tones are ambiguous. They don't clearly signal a direction. They contain hints of being both high and low at the same time. So your brain has to make a decision. That decision seems to depend on more than just the sound. It appears to be shaped by the listener's experience, background, and even the accent of the language they speak. Diana Deutsch, the psychologist who discovered this illusion, found that people often hear one of the tone pairs as rising and the other as falling. But when she played the same pair to different people, their answers often disagreed. One person might hear the pattern as going up, while another might hear it as going down. When she tested more people, she noticed a pattern. People who grew up in different regions tended to hear the direction in different ways. This hinted at a deeper connection between speech and pitch perception. The brain uses pitch all the time, not just in music. In language, pitch can signal emphasis, emotion, and meaning. Some languages, like Mandarin Chinese, use pitch changes to distinguish words. Even in English, pitch helps signal the difference between a question and a statement. Over time, people become used to certain pitch patterns, and the brain starts to treat them as normal. The Tritone Paradox may tap into those patterns. When faced with an unclear pitch shift, the brain uses past experience with speech and music to decide which direction to hear. The illusion also shows up when people hum or try to sing the two tones they just heard. Often, what they hum is consistent with what they perceived. If someone hears the tone going up, they sing it as an ascending interval. If they hear it going down, they sing a descending one. This shows that the perception is not just a momentary mistake. It becomes part of how the brain stores and reproduces the sound. To test the illusion yourself, you can find recordings of tritone pairs online. Listen to one pair and decide whether the second tone sounds higher or lower than the first. Then replay the same pair. Does your answer stay the same? Try another pair. Some may sound like they go up, others like they go down. Ask someone else to listen to the same clips. See if they hear the same direction as you. Chances are, you'll disagree on at least some of the examples. The Shepard tones used in the illusion play an important role. Because each tone contains many overlapping pitches, the usual rules for comparing pitch don't apply. Normally, we decide whether a tone is higher or lower based on its dominant frequency. But Shepard tones don't have a single dominant frequency. They have several, and those frequencies fade in and out. That makes it hard for the brain to anchor the sound. It has to choose a pitch center based on context. But in this case, there is no context. The tones exist in isolation. The brain reaches for a pattern, but the pattern depends on what the brain expects, not what the tones clearly provide. In music, we often rely on context to judge pitch. When a melody plays, we know how the notes relate to each other because we know the scale or the key. We recognize the shape of the tune. But with the tritone paradox, there is no melody. There's just two tones, no rhythm, no harmony, no context. So the brain fills in the blanks using whatever tools it has available. Those tools include experience with music, speech, and learned associations. Some people hear the same tone pairs differently depending on what day they listen. Mood, attention, and memory can all affect how the brain interprets the tones. There's no guarantee that the illusion will sound the same every time. Some pairs always sound like they go up, others always go down. But some pairs are unstable and can flip. That's part of what makes the tritone paradox so interesting. It's not just about the sound, it's about the mind reacting to sound. This illusion also challenges the idea that pitch is a simple, fixed quality. We often think of pitch as something we can measure. A note is either high or low, a scale goes up or down. But the tritone paradox shows that pitch can be flexible. It depends on how the brain processes complex cues. When the cues are ambiguous, perception splits. Two people with normal hearing, listening to the same tones, can hear different things, and neither one is wrong. The brain is making a judgment call, using the information it has. Researchers have used the tritone paradox to study how people form mental maps of pitch. These maps seem to vary from person to person. Some people may naturally hear the illusion in one way because of how their brain organizes sound. Others may be influenced more by language, musical training, or even genetic factors. The exact cause of these differences isn't fully known, but the illusion gives a window into the variation in auditory perception. Musicians often find the tritone paradox especially striking. They are used to hearing intervals with clear direction, but with these tone pairs, their training doesn't always help. The Shepard tones are designed to hide the usual clues that guide musical judgment. The result is a puzzle that even skilled ears can't easily solve. In some cases, musical training can even increase sensitivity to the illusion because the brain has learned to respond more strongly to pitch differences. You can also test how musical context affects the illusion by pairing the tritone tones with a short melody. Some people find that the melody pulls the pitch in one direction. If the melody ends on the first tone, the second tone might sound like a resolution, or it might sound like a surprise. The context can shape the illusion, even if the tones themselves stay the same. The Tritone Paradox reminds us that perception is not just about the outside world. It's about how the brain interprets that world. With clear cues, the brain quickly finds the answer. With mixed signals, it has to guess. And when it guesses, people can disagree. The sound stays the same, but the experience changes. That's what makes the illusion so powerful and so human. The speech-to-song illusion is a clear example of how the brain treats language and music differently. It starts with a simple spoken phrase. At first, it sounds like normal speech, no melody, just words. But when the phrase repeats over and over, something changes. Instead of hearing plain speech, you begin to hear a tune. The phrase starts to sound like it's being sung. The words haven't changed. The recording hasn't changed. What changes is how your brain interprets the rhythm and pitch of the sounds. This illusion shows how the brain pulls apart sound into different categories. One of those categories is speech. Another is music. Both use pitch, timing, and pattern, but they serve different purposes. Speech carries meaning through words. Music carries feeling through melody and rhythm. The brain handles each one using different systems. But when a sound sits between the two, the brain can shift how it hears it. The speech-to-song illusion was first described by psychologist Diana Deutsch. She noticed the effect while editing audio recordings of speech. In one recording, she had someone say a simple sentence, sometimes behave so strangely. As she played a short section over and over to check for clarity, she noticed it started to sound musical. Other people who listened to the same loop agreed. After enough repetition, they heard it as a song instead of speech. What makes the illusion work is repetition. When a phrase is played once or twice, the brain hears it as language. It focuses on the meaning of the words. But when the phrase repeats many times, the meaning becomes less important. The brain starts to treat the sound as a pattern. It focuses more on the rise and fall of the pitch, the timing of the syllables, and the rhythm of the words. That's when speech starts to feel like music. You can try the illusion yourself. Find a short clip of someone speaking. It can be a simple sentence with some pitch variation. Loop a section of about 3 to 5 words. Listen to it 5 or 6 times in a row. You may notice that the phrase begins to sing. It gains a kind of melody, and the rhythm becomes more noticeable. What once sounded like casual speech now feels like it could be a line from a song. The shift doesn't happen for everyone right away. Some people hear the musical quality after 3 or 4 loops. Others need more repetition. The effect also depends on the speech itself. Phrases with clear pitch changes and regular rhythm work best. A sentence like, "Don't forget your umbrella," might not trigger the illusion as easily as, "That's not what I meant to do," because the second has more variation in tone and timing. The illusion can be stronger when the phrase has a natural ups and downs in pitch, like a question or an emotional statement. This is because normal speech already contains melody. We just don't notice it most of the time. In conversation, pitch changes help us express surprise, stress a word, or signal a question. But we don't think of it as singing. The speech-to-song illusion pulls that hidden melody to the front. What's happening in the brain during this illusion is still being studied, but some things are clear. The brain has systems for processing speech. These systems focus on fast changes in sound that match syllables and consonants. The brain also has systems for music. These focus on pitch, rhythm, and tone. When a spoken phrase repeats, the speech system stops responding as strongly. The repetition makes it harder to pay attention to the meaning. The music system, which is better at picking up on patterns, starts to take over. This switch happens below conscious thought. You don't decide to hear the phrase as a song. Your brain does it on its own. That's part of what makes the illusion so compelling. It shows how flexible our hearing is and how the brain changes its focus based on context. The exact same sound can be heard in two different ways. Musicians and songwriters often use this effect without realizing it. When setting lyrics to music, they may borrow the natural rhythm and pitch of speech. A spoken phrase like "I miss you" already carries emotion. When it's repeated or drawn out in a melody, it becomes even more powerful. The illusion shows that the line between speech and song is not sharp. It's more like a sliding scale, and the brain can move from one side to the other with repetition. The effect also shows how we learn language. Infants often hear the same words repeated by adults, sometimes with exaggerated pitch and rhythm. This helps them notice the patterns in speech. It may also help them begin to hear the musical qualities of language. Some researchers think that music and language may share common roots in brain development. The speech-to-song illusion supports that idea by showing how easily the brain can flip from one mode of listening to the other. In some cases, once the phrase has shifted into song, it stays that way for a while. Even if you listen to the full sentence again, it may still sound musical. Your brain has learned the melody. This shows how perception can be changed by experience. Once a pattern is detected, the brain holds on to it. Later repetitions strengthen that pattern, even if the sound input doesn't change. The illusion also tells us something about memory. When a phrase becomes musical, it can be easier to remember. That's why we often teach children using songs. It's also why advertisers use jingles. The combination of words and melody creates a memory hook. The speech-to-song illusion shows that even plain speech can become memorable once the brain treats it like music. You can build your own version of the illusion by recording your own voice. Pick a phrase with some natural pitch variation. Say it slowly and clearly. Then loop the phrase using audio software or a simple voice recorder. Listen back and wait for the switch. You might even try different phrases to see which ones flip faster. The more you experiment, the more you learn how the illusion works and how your brain responds to repeated sound. This illusion is one of many that show how sound perception is active, not passive. The brain doesn't just take in sound, it organizes it, focuses on some parts, and ignores others. With repetition, the brain starts to shift its focus. It hears patterns where before it only heard speech. That shift shows how powerful repetition is, not just for changing what we hear, but also for shaping how we think about what we hear. The speech-to-song illusion reminds us that music and language are closely linked. They both use rhythm, pitch, and timing. They both help us connect with others, and they both depend on the brain's ability to make sense of sound. This illusion is a simple example, but it reveals a deep truth. What we hear is not just what enters the ear, it's what the brain chooses to make of it. In this case, a few repeated words are all it takes to turn speech into song. You can also test this with music. If a note in a melody is briefly covered by a burst of noise, you may not notice the note is missing. The brain fills in the melody based on the notes before and after. This keeps the musical line smooth. Musicians and sound engineers sometimes use this effect to hide flaws or clean up recordings. They add short bursts of noise to cover gaps, knowing less. The auditory continuity illusion is a sound illusion that makes a tone seem unbroken, even when part of it is missing. When a continuous sound is interrupted by noise, like static or a burst of another sound, your brain often fills in the gap. You still hear the original tone as if it kept going without interruption. The tone doesn't actually play through the noise, but it feels like it does. This illusion shows how the brain keeps things stable when the signal isn't perfect. The illusion happens because your brain wants to hear smooth, continuous sound. In everyday life, sounds often get blocked. A passing car might drown out a word in a conversation. A loud cough might mask a note in a song. But even when you don't hear the full sound, your brain still makes sense of it. It assumes the sound continued and fills in the part you missed. This is not a guess you think about. It's automatic. The brain decides the sound didn't stop, even when there's no proof. To try the illusion yourself, listen to a simple tone, like a steady beep. In a test version, the beep plays for a few seconds, then cuts out for a moment, then returns. You hear the silence. The break is clear. But now imagine the same tone, only this time, a burst of noise replaces the silence. Instead of a pause, you hear a short bit of white noise. The tone before and after the noise is the same. But this time, it doesn't sound broken. You don't hear two parts with a noise in the middle. You hear one long, smooth tone. The noise masks the gap, and your brain fills it in. The key to this illusion is masking. The noise must be loud enough and have the right timing to hide the missing part of the tone. If the noise is too soft or doesn't cover the gap fully, you hear the break. If the noise is strong and matches the missing section in time, your brain connects the parts. It tells you the tone kept going behind the noise. But it didn't. The illusion shows how much the brain depends on context and expectation. This illusion works best with simple tones, like a steady beep, but it also works with speech and music. In a spoken sentence, if part of a word is replaced by a short burst of noise, many people still hear the full word. Their brains restore the missing part based on what they expect to hear. For example, if someone says, "I saw the cat," and the word cat is partly masked by a cough, most people still hear cat. The sentence still makes sense. The brain uses that sense to fill in the gap. That's the auditory continuity illusion working in natural speech. Brain will smooth over the result. In the lab, researchers study this illusion to learn how the brain processes sound. They find that people usually don't notice the trick. They believe they heard the full tone. When tested with short tones and carefully timed noise, most listeners report that the tone sounded continuous. Some even insist it never stopped, even after being told part of it was missing. This shows how strong the illusion can be. The illusion depends on timing. If the noise starts too early or too late, the brain can't connect the two parts of the tone. If the break is too long, the illusion breaks. There's a window of a few hundred milliseconds where the effect is strongest. Within that window, the brain assumes continuity. Outside it, the brain notices the gap. The illusion also depends on the type of sound. Pure tones work well because they are easy to track. Complex sounds with lots of variation may be harder to connect. Still, the illusion can happen with many types of sound, as long as the gap is masked and the context makes sense. One reason this illusion is useful in real life is that the world is noisy. We rarely hear sounds in perfect silence. Other noises interrupt speech and background sound all the time. The auditory continuity illusion helps the brain make sense of speech in these conditions. It smooths over the parts that get covered or lost. This makes communication more reliable, even in poor listening environments. Think of a conversation on a city street. A truck passes by just as your friend says something. You miss part of the word, but you still know what was said. Your brain fills in the missing sound. The illusion helps you hear something that wasn't there. In this case, it keeps the conversation going without disruption. It's not a mistake, it's a feature of how hearing works. The brain uses memory and expectation to guide this process. If you've heard the word before, or if the sentence gives a strong clue, the brain knows what to fill in. It doesn't invent a random sound, it chooses the most likely one. That's why context is so important. The illusion doesn't work well if the missing part could be many things. It works best when the brain has a clear guess. This also means that the illusion is personal. Two people might hear the same sound but perceive it differently, depending on their experience, focus, and what they expect to hear. A listener who knows the word or tune is more likely to fill in the gap. Someone new to the sound may notice the break. So the illusion shows not only how sound is processed, but how memory and attention shape perception. The auditory continuity illusion has practical uses. In hearing aids and speech recognition software, developers try to build systems that mimic the brain's ability to fill in gaps. They want machines to handle noisy input the way people do. By studying how humans use this illusion, engineers can design better tools for real-world listening. The illusion also appears in sound design and film. A sound editor might use a burst of noise like a car horn or crash to mask a cut in dialogue. The audience hears a smooth line, even if a word or syllable was removed. This trick depends on the same principles. The brain assumes continuity behind the noise. In education, the illusion helps students understand that hearing is not just about the ears. The brain plays a major role in shaping what we hear. The auditory continuity illusion is a strong example of this. It shows that what we hear is often a mix of real input and brain-based completion. The sound may stop, but the experience continues. This illusion is one of many that reveal the brain's role in perception. It doesn't just copy the world. It interprets, fills in, and smooths over what we hear. The auditory continuity illusion is a simple case with deep meaning. It shows how perception stays stable, even when the signal doesn't. The sound may be interrupted, but the brain keeps the story going. The motion after effect, sometimes called the waterfall illusion, is a visual effect that occurs after you look at something moving in one direction for a period of time. When you then look at a still object, that object appears to move in the opposite direction. The movement you see is not real. It's created by your brain as it adjusts after focusing on constant motion. The effect is strong, clear, and has been known for hundreds of years. To see the illusion for yourself, find a video of a waterfall or any pattern that moves continuously in one direction. Stare at it for about 30 seconds. Keep your eyes still and focus on the motion. Then look at a nearby object that isn't moving, a wall, a table, or your hand. That object may seem to shift or flow in the opposite direction. If the waterfall was moving down, the still object will appear to drift up. If the motion was left to right, the still scene may seem to slide right to left. This illusion shows how motion detection in the brain works. Inside the visual system are neurons that respond to movement. Some neurons fire when something moves to the left. Others respond when something moves to the right. These neurons work together to help you understand direction and speed. But they don't keep firing at full strength all the time. They adapt. Adaptation is a key part of this illusion. When you stare at movement in one direction, the neurons that respond to that direction become less sensitive. They reduce their firing rate because they are being stimulated for too long. Meanwhile, the neurons that respond to the opposite direction are not being used, so they remain at their normal level of sensitivity. When you stop looking at the moving image and look at something still, your brain compares signals from both sets of neurons. The adapted neurons, now firing less, send a weaker signal. The opposite direction neurons are still firing normally. The brain interprets this as real motion in the opposite direction, even though the object isn't moving. This mismatch between the expected balance and the actual signals creates the illusion. The reason it's called the waterfall illusion is because of how clearly you can see it after looking at a real waterfall. If you stand in front of falling water and watch it flow down for a minute or two, the rocks beside the waterfall may seem to move up when you look at them. That's the motion after effect in action. Your brain has adapted to the downward motion and now signals upward motion when that input stops. The effect isn't limited to natural scenes. You can see it with rotating spirals, scrolling text, or even moving lines in a video game. As long as the motion is steady and in one direction, and you watch it for long enough, the illusion can occur. It works best when you focus on the center of the motion and keep your eyes still. Blinking or looking away too much can reduce the strength of the effect. The illusion is not caused by something in your eyes. It happens in the brain, particularly in areas involved in processing motion, such as the visual cortex. Brain scans show that even when you're looking at a still image during the after effect, the motion-sensitive areas of your brain are still active. They are responding as if real motion is happening. That's why the illusion feels so real. Scientists use the motion after effect to study how the brain processes movement. It helps them learn about how neurons adapt to input, how visual signals are compared and interpreted, and how long adaptation effects can last. In some studies, researchers measure how long the illusion continues and how strong it feels. They can adjust the speed, direction, and length of the adapting motion to test how the brain responds. The duration of the illusion can vary. A few seconds of looking at motion can cause a brief effect. A minute or more can lead to a stronger, longer-lasting illusion. Some people feel the after effect for just a few seconds. Others may see the phantom movement for half a minute or more. The exact length depends on factors like attention, the strength of the original motion, and the viewer's sensitivity. The motion after effect shows that perception is not just a record of what's in front of you. It's also a result of what your brain has been doing just before. The brain works to adjust its responses to changing input. This helps you stay alert to new things. If something moves in one direction for a long time, it's probably not urgent. The brain tunes it out, but when the input changes suddenly, as when you stop looking at the motion, the system resets, and that reset can create the illusion of new motion. This adaptation is useful in daily life. It helps prevent overload. If your brain responded equally to everything all the time, you'd be overwhelmed. By adapting to what's steady and unchanging, the brain can focus on new, possibly important information. The motion after effect is a side effect of this useful system. It shows the brain's flexibility and its constant work to keep perception stable. Artists and designers sometimes use the principles behind the motion after effect in their work. Animated backgrounds, spinning graphics, or repeated patterns can cause brief after effects that draw attention or create a feeling of energy. Motion illusions also appear in media installations and visual experiments where still images take on life after you stare at movement. In some fields, the effect is taken into account when designing visual displays. Pilots, for example, might experience brief after effects after focusing on steady movement during flight. Virtual reality designers consider how prolonged motion might cause strange visual shifts when users move between scenes. Understanding the motion after effect helps reduce confusion and makes for more stable design. There are also versions of the illusion that involve complex motion. If you look at a spiral that seems to be expanding, then look at a still object, that object may seem to shrink. The opposite works too. A contracting spiral can make the next thing you look at seem to grow. These effects use the same principle. The brain adapts to one type of motion and then briefly signals the opposite when the motion stops. Some people find the illusion surprising, while others enjoy watching it on purpose. It's a safe, easy way to see how the brain shapes perception. The effect doesn't cause harm and fades on its own. But it serves as a powerful reminder that what we see is not always what's there. The brain interprets, filters, and adjusts input constantly. When motion is steady, the brain adapts. When it stops, the brain takes a moment to recalibrate, and in that moment, you see motion that isn't real. This effect also teaches something about how the senses work together. If you see motion but don't feel it, or if you feel motion without seeing it, the brain must decide what's true. The motion after effect isolates vision and shows how visual motion is processed on its own. But in the real world, the brain combines information from many senses to create a stable picture. Understanding how each sense works on its own helps explain how they all work together. The motion after effect is one of many illusions that reveal how perception is constructed. It seems simple. Look at motion, then see the opposite, but it opens the door to complex questions about how we understand the world through sight. The brain wants to be efficient. It adapts to steady input and stays alert for changes. The illusion shows that when that input shifts, even for a moment, the brain's effort to stay balanced can lead to a short, vivid error. That error becomes something we can see, something that feels real. It's not just a trick. It's the result of how perception works every moment of the day. The flash lag illusion happens when a moving object and a flashed object appear on the screen at the same location and time, but the moving object looks ahead of the flash. This creates a strange and noticeable gap. Even though both objects are aligned at the moment of the flash, our eyes and brain don't see them that way. The brain shows us the moving object farther along its path, while the flashed object stays behind. That mismatch is not caused by a delay in the moving object or by the flash happening too late. It's caused by how the brain processes time and motion. To understand the illusion, imagine a dot moving steadily from left to right across a screen. At one point along its path, a second dot flashes directly on top of it. The flash lasts for a very short time, just a few milliseconds, and then disappears. You'd expect the two dots to look like they overlap in that moment, but they don't. Most people see the moving dot as being slightly ahead of the flash. The flash seems to lag behind, even though they were in the same spot when it happened. You can test this illusion with simple animations or videos. Set up a rotating ring with a small circle moving around it at a steady speed. At a fixed point in the circle's path, flash another circle. Repeat this several times. You'll notice that the rotating circle seems farther along its path than the flash, even though the two are aligned in time and space. The flash appears late, but it's not actually late. That's just how the brain shows it. This illusion works across different kinds of motion: straight lines, circular paths, and even complex shapes. It also works with other features like color or shape. If a moving object changes color at the same time that a flash appears, the color shift might also seem to happen after the flash. That's because the brain processes the motion in a different way than it processes the brief flash. One explanation for the flash lag illusion is motion extrapolation. The idea is that the brain tries to predict where a moving object is going, because there's a delay between the moment light hits the eyes and when the brain finishes processing it. The brain adjusts. It doesn't show us where the object was when the light first hit the retina. It shows us where it expects the object to be now, based on its speed and direction. That prediction makes it easier to keep up with fast motion, like a car passing by or a ball flying through the air. The flash, on the other hand, is a sudden and brief signal. It doesn't give the brain enough time to make a prediction. There's no motion to follow, just a single moment of light. The brain processes the flash as it is without applying motion rules. As a result, the flash appears to lag behind the moving object. The brain updates the position of the moving object but leaves the flash where it was. Another explanation involves processing time. It's possible that the brain simply takes longer to process a flash than it does to process continuous motion. The moving object is being tracked, so its position is constantly updated. The flash, being new and abrupt, might enter the system through a slower route. This small delay would cause it to appear behind the moving object by the time both reach conscious perception. Researchers have tested this illusion in many ways. Some experiments use eye tracking to make sure the viewer isn't moving their eyes during the flash. Others measure brain activity using tools like EEG or fMRI to see when the signals from each stimulus arrive. These studies support the idea that the brain handles moving and flashed objects differently. The results also show that the effect happens at a basic level of processing, before attention or conscious thought play a role. Interestingly, the illusion does not go away even when people know it's happening. If you explain it and show it to someone multiple times, they still see the moving object ahead of the flash. That's because the illusion is baked into the early stages of perception. It's not about being tricked or confused. It's about how the visual system solves the problem of delay. This illusion has real-world implications. In sports, for example, a referee watching a fast-moving ball may see it as farther along than it truly is. In driving, a pedestrian flashing into view might seem to appear behind where they really are. In both cases, perception can be slightly off, not because the eyes fail, but because the brain is doing its best to keep up. Designers of user interfaces and video games also take this illusion into account. Smooth animations feel more natural because the brain expects motion to be continuous and predicted. Abrupt changes, like flashes or pops, may seem slightly out of place if not timed carefully. Developers use techniques to blend motion and sudden events in a way that feels seamless, avoiding the sense of lag that this illusion highlights. The flash lag illusion also plays a role in how we experience music videos, movies, and fast editing. When objects on screen move quickly and lights flash at the same time, directors have to be careful about how the viewer will interpret the timing. Misalignment can cause a flash to look like it's late, even if it's perfectly timed. Editors adjust timing by small amounts, sometimes a frame or two, to match the viewer's perception. In experiments, the illusion can be changed or reduced in certain ways. If the flash comes with a sound at the exact same time, the illusion gets weaker. The sound helps anchor the flash in time. This shows that the brain combines information from different senses to build a more accurate timeline. Adding a tactile stimulus, a small vibration, can also reduce the effect. Multisensory input seems to sharpen the brain's sense of timing. There's also a reverse version of the illusion. If the flash appears after the moving object stops, people may see it as ahead of the object. This version suggests that the brain's predictions are flexible and can be fooled by different timing patterns. It supports the idea that what we see is not just what hits the eyes, but also what the brain expects and infers. This illusion highlights the complexity of seeing things in real time. Light reaches the eyes instantly, but the brain needs time to make sense of it. If it waited to finish all its processing before showing us a picture, we'd always be behind. Instead, the brain speeds things up by predicting motion and filling in gaps. Most of the time, this works well. We catch balls, follow cars, and respond to fast motion with ease. But illusions like the flash lag show that even helpful systems can sometimes cause errors. The brain favors continuous, predictable input. Sudden events like flashes or abrupt changes stand out, but they don't always line up with moving objects. The illusion appears because the brain tries to give us a smooth experience of motion. It sacrifices perfect timing in favor of a clear, steady view of the world. The moving object appears ahead of the flash, not because of a mistake, but because the brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do: predict, smooth, and adjust for delays. What we see is a filtered version of reality, one that helps us keep pace with a world in motion. The infinite loop escalator illusion is a visual trick that creates the appearance of never-ending movement. It looks like an escalator that climbs or descends forever, but never gets anywhere. The structure seems real, and the motion looks smooth and continuous. But when you look closer, you realize the movement can't be real. It's a visual loop with no true start or end. What you're seeing is not possible in the physical world, but the brain treats it like it is. This illusion often shows up in videos or digital art. A set of escalator steps appears to climb endlessly through a looped structure. The steps go up, disappear at the top, and then somehow reappear at the bottom, continuing to rise again. There's no pause, no break in motion. It creates a smooth, closed cycle. Your brain follows the motion, expecting to see an end, but it never finds one. The illusion tricks your sense of space and time. To build this illusion, designers use forced perspective and motion mapping. The structure itself is carefully drawn to appear three-dimensional, even though it's flat. Artists often use digital tools to align angles and curves so the motion appears smooth. The steps move in a way that makes them seem to rise or fall, while actually looping back into their own starting point. The path curves or folds in ways that are hidden from view. The design must be just right. If the angles are even slightly off, the illusion breaks. One key to the illusion is how the brain handles motion. We expect objects to move in straight paths or along clear curves. When motion appears to rise, the brain expects it to end higher than it began. When steps on an escalator rise, we assume they must reach another floor. That's what happens in the real world. The infinite loop escalator uses that expectation to create confusion. The steps rise, but they never finish. The brain keeps following the motion, expecting a stop or change, but it never comes. The Penrose stairs are a well-known example of this kind of illusion. They show a staircase that loops in on itself. Each step seems to rise, but the total structure is flat and closed. The infinite loop escalator adds motion to the same idea. Instead of a still image, it uses moving steps to make the illusion stronger. Your eyes follow the motion, and the brain locks into the pattern. The steps seem to travel forever, though the path they follow is impossible. This illusion works best when you can't see the whole structure clearly. Artists often hide the key parts of the loop with shadows, curves, or obstructions. That way, the viewer can't spot where the path folds back on itself. If the full shape were visible, the trick might fail. The brain would realize the motion is circular or artificial. By hiding the return path, the illusion keeps the brain guessing. One version of the illusion uses animation. Imagine a short video where steps move up through a column, disappear, then reappear at the bottom. The camera stays fixed, and the steps rise at a steady pace. Even though the same steps are looping, the timing and placement make it feel like a new step appears each time. There's no visible mechanism to explain the return. The motion seems continuous and endless. Another version uses virtual reality. In a VR headset, a user can stand on the loop. As they move forward, the environment scrolls past in a way that suggests upward or downward motion. But the track simply loops, and the user ends up where they started. The motion feels real, even though the space is closed. The illusion works because the brain trusts the visual input. It assumes what it sees is possible. This illusion shares features with the Mobius strip, a surface with only one side and one edge. If you trace the path along a Mobius strip, you return to your starting point without crossing an edge. The infinite loop escalator is similar. The steps cycle along a hidden Mobius-like path. That loop creates the impression of motion without end. In real life, movement has limits. A car travels a distance. An escalator climbs to a floor. A moving walkway ends at a gate. Each of these has a start and a stop. The infinite loop escalator removes that ending. It replaces a destination with repetition. That change disrupts the way we understand movement. The brain keeps waiting for closure, but never gets it. This illusion highlights how strongly the brain depends on visual cues. It shows that even when something is physically impossible, if it looks right, the brain will accept it. That acceptance happens automatically. You don't choose to believe the steps are climbing forever. Your brain makes that judgment based on what it sees. The motion in the illusion also plays a role in how we track time. Movement suggests progress. When we see an object move, we assume it's going somewhere. That's how we measure time, through change and direction. In the infinite loop escalator, motion happens without progress. That creates a conflict. Your brain sees change, but no destination. That mismatch adds to the illusion's strength. Artists and designers use this trick to explore perception. It's not just about fooling the eye. It's about showing how the brain organizes the world. The infinite loop escalator reveals the rules the brain follows, like expecting movement to lead somewhere. By breaking those rules, the illusion makes you notice how much work your brain does behind the scenes. Some designs add details to make the loop more convincing. They include shadows, reflections, or background elements that support the idea of vertical motion. These small touches help the brain believe the scene. Even though the logic doesn't hold up, the appearance is enough to sell the motion. You can even build a version of this illusion on paper. Draw an escalator in a looped path. Use shading to suggest depth. Add figures or steps that repeat in a cycle. With the right angles, the image looks like it could work. When done well, it tricks the viewer into seeing movement that defies space. The illusion also works without steps. Any repeated motion along a closed path can create the same effect. A moving belt, a rolling ball, or a scrolling pattern can loop in ways that appear endless. The key is to hide the return and present the motion as continuous. The brain fills in the gaps and treats the loop as a journey. In education, illusions like the infinite loop escalator help teach how perception works. They show that seeing is not just about input, it's about interpretation. The brain uses past experience, expectations, and visual signals to build a picture of reality. When those signals are arranged in certain ways, they produce impossible results, but the brain still believes them. The illusion also connects to how we experience cycles in life. Patterns that repeat can feel like they go on forever. We walk the same paths, take the same actions, and expect change, but sometimes end up back where we started. The infinite loop escalator is a visual version of that experience. It shows movement without destination, change without progress. This kind of loop can also feel hypnotic. The steady motion draws attention. The eyes follow the steps over and over. There's no point to stop. That lack of an ending creates a kind of mental rhythm. It keeps the viewer engaged, waiting for a moment that never comes. The infinite loop escalator doesn't need to move fast to work. Slow, steady motion is enough. In fact, slower speeds often make the illusion stronger. They give the brain more time to accept the pattern and treat it as real. Fast motion can break the spell, drawing attention to the trick. This illusion reminds us that what feels endless is not always infinite. The loop is closed. The steps repeat, but the brain treats it as open and moving forward. That false sense of direction is what makes the illusion powerful. It's not just what we see, it's what we believe we see. The infinite loop escalator makes us believe in a journey that never ends, and that belief holds, even when reason tells us it can't. The Wagon-Wheel Effect is a visual illusion where a wheel that spins forward appears to rotate backward. It often happens in movies, on television, or under certain types of lighting. You may see a car driving forward, but its wheels seem to spin in reverse. This effect doesn't match what you expect. Your brain knows the car is moving ahead, so the wheels should turn in that same direction. But they don't look that way. The illusion breaks your sense of motion and forces you to question what you're seeing. This effect is not caused by the wheel itself. It's caused by how your eyes or a camera capture motion. When a spinning wheel moves fast, it creates a visual pattern that repeats. If you watch it under flickering light or record it with a camera that takes still images in quick steps, the wheel may seem to move backward. The same thing can happen when you watch a fan, a helicopter rotor, or even a spinning coin. To understand the wagon-wheel effect, you first need to know how cameras work. A film camera records motion by taking a series of still pictures, called frames. Each frame captures the position of the object at a specific moment. When the frames play back quickly, usually 24 or 30 times per second, they create the appearance of smooth motion. But there's a catch. If a spinning wheel completes just under one full rotation between two frames, the camera records each spoke of the wheel in a slightly earlier position. On playback, the spokes appear to move backward because the position of each spoke lines up more closely with the previous one than the next. Think of a wheel with 12 spokes. If it spins just fast enough that each spoke moves to the place of the spoke before it between frames, then every frame shows the wheel in almost the same position as before, just shifted backward slightly. The eye interprets this as reverse motion. The wheel seems to turn backward, even though it's really turning forward. That's the wagon-wheel effect in its basic form. This same principle applies to the human eye under certain lighting. In daylight, your vision works continuously, but in artificial light, especially fluorescent or LED lights, the brightness may flicker slightly. This flicker happens too fast to notice, but your brain still processes the light in short bursts, almost like a camera. If the flickering matches the speed of the wheel in a certain way, the effect appears. The wheel may seem to move backward or freeze in place. Some people notice this while looking at a fan under overhead lighting. The blades slow down or reverse for no clear reason. The wagon-wheel effect can also happen when you view spinning objects in strobe light. A strobe flashes on and off at a regular speed. If the flash rate matches the wheel's rotation just right, the wheel may look frozen or moving backward. This happens because the strobe only shows the wheel at fixed points in its path. Your eyes never see the in-between motion. They only see snapshots, and the brain fills in the rest. This illusion highlights the difference between continuous and sampled motion. When you see a wheel spin in real life, without any flicker or frame rate involved, you perceive smooth, forward motion. But when the view gets broken into steps, either by a camera or flickering light, the brain makes a mistake. It misreads the pattern and reports the wrong direction. That mistake comes from trying to track something that isn't being shown continuously. Motion is about change over time. When that change happens in distinct steps, the brain can only compare one moment to the next. If those moments are spaced just right, the comparison creates the illusion of backward movement. This isn't something we choose to see. It's how the visual system processes snapshots. The brain assumes the simplest possible motion between frames, and sometimes that motion is wrong. The effect also connects to how we interpret repeating patterns. A wheel with many spokes can create confusion because all the spokes look the same. If you can't tell one spoke from another, it's hard to know which way it moved. That makes it easy for the brain to flip the direction. The illusion is stronger with evenly spaced lines, like the spokes of a wagon wheel. That's where the name comes from. Early movies showed wagons with wheels that seemed to turn backward as they rolled forward across the screen. Viewers noticed it, but didn't understand why it happened. In modern settings, the effect still shows up. People see it in YouTube videos, on their phones, or in slow-motion clips. Sports replays sometimes catch the effect with bicycle wheels or spinning balls. When the frame rate and motion line up in a certain way, the illusion appears. Viewers might think the video was edited or the object was rigged to spin backward, but it's just a natural result of how cameras and screens show motion. This illusion also teaches something important about perception. We don't see the world as it is. We see the version our brain creates. That version depends on how often we receive new information. If the updates come in short steps, the brain connects those steps as best it can. In the case of the wagon-wheel effect, that connection leads to the wrong direction. The effect can vary with wheel speed. At slow speeds, the wheel turns normally. As speed increases, the illusion starts. The wheel may appear to slow down, freeze, or reverse. If it goes even faster, it may flip direction again. These shifts happen because the time between frames stays the same, but the wheel's position changes more with each step. That makes it harder for the brain to track real motion and easier for it to fall into the illusion. You can create your own version of the Wagon-Wheel effect at home. Set up a bicycle or fan and light it with a strobe light. Adjust the flash rate and wheel speed until the illusion appears. You'll see the wheel move backward, stand still, or jump. By changing the speed or flash rate slightly, you can make the illusion flip again. This setup gives a clear view of how sampled motion affects what we see. This effect also has uses in science and art. Researchers use similar illusions to study how the brain tracks motion and time. Artists and animators use the effect to create strange or interesting visuals. In video games and movies, designers sometimes include the effect on purpose to suggest speed or disorientation. It adds to the feeling of fast action, even if the motion isn't real. The illusion also matters in technical work. Engineers designing wheels, fans, or rotors must be aware of how their parts appear under different light. If the parts seem to move wrong under certain lighting, it could lead to safety issues or confusion. Manufacturers test how their machines look in motion to prevent this problem. Even digital displays must be tested for flicker and refresh rate to avoid unintentional effects. What makes the Wagon-Wheel effect compelling is that it feels real. When you see the wheel spin backward, your eyes trust it. Your brain doesn't question it unless you have reason to. That's because the brain usually does a good job tracking motion. The illusion only shows up when conditions fall into a narrow range. In normal life, the brain's approach works well, but under specific limits, it can fail, and that failure reveals how vision works. It also shows that motion is a complex thing. It's not just about seeing where something is. It's about seeing where it was, where it's going, and how fast it gets there. The Wagon-Wheel effect tricks the brain by feeding it broken steps and hiding the real path. The result is a reversal that shouldn't happen, but still does. And once you've seen it, it's hard to forget. The Color Phi Phenomenon is a visual illusion where two lights flash one after the other in different locations, and the viewer sees a single light moving between them. More than that, if the two lights are different colors, the moving light seems to change color in the middle of its path. This color change appears even though it was never shown. Nothing ever moved, and the middle color was never displayed. The lights simply blink in place. Still, the brain adds motion and a transition that didn't actually happen. The illusion shows how the brain constructs not only movement, but color and timing as well. To understand how the Color Phi phenomenon works, start with a simple example. Imagine a dark screen. On the left side, a red light flashes for a brief moment. After a short pause, less than a second, a green light flashes on the right side. There's no light in between, and the two lights never appear at the same time. But if the timing and spacing are right, you don't just see two flashes. You see a red dot moving from left to right, and you see it turn green somewhere along the way. You experience smooth motion and a color shift, though neither one happened on the screen. This illusion is a version of what's called the Phi phenomenon, where the brain creates the appearance of motion from a series of still images. It's related to how films and animation work. Movies show 24 frames per second. Each frame is a still picture, but the brain links them together and sees motion. The Color Phi phenomenon adds another layer, color change. It's not just movement that the brain invents, but also the visual event of changing color over time. The key part of the illusion is that the change feels real. It doesn't look like two separate flashes. It looks like a single light that travels and transforms. The transition seems smooth. You can even point to the spot where the light appears to change color, even though nothing is actually there. Your eyes follow a path, and your brain fills in the middle with a motion and color shift that match what it expects, not what was shown. The illusion depends on precise timing. If the gap between the two flashes is too short, the brain may not register the motion. It might just see one blur or two close lights. If the gap is too long, the brain sees two separate events. But when the timing is right, usually around 100 to 200 milliseconds, the illusion appears. The brain connects the two flashes and builds a story around them. That story includes movement and a change in color that feels continuous. Designers sometimes use this principle in digital displays and lights. By showing lights in sequence with slight color shifts, they can create smooth transitions or the appearance of flowing motion. Traffic signs, warning lights, and stage effects often use color and movement in ways that trigger similar illusions. The brain completes the scene, even when it's just made up of timed flashes. The illusion also points to how we process time. The fact that the brain can change how the first flash is perceived based on what happens after it suggests that perception doesn't always follow strict order. Instead, the brain gathers input over short windows and then creates a scene that fits all the data. That scene may not match the actual timeline of events. It's more important to the brain that the events make sense together than that they happened in strict order. The Color Phi Phenomenon also relates to how we see color transitions in motion. In real life, when a ball moves from red light into green light, we see the color shift gradually across space. That's a real change caused by lighting. But in the illusion, the shift is made up. There's no real movement and no real transition, but we see one anyway. That shows how closely linked color and motion are in perception. A small change in timing or position can create a vivid experience of something that never happened. This effect can be combined with other illusions. For example, if the background changes or the shapes of the lights change, the illusion can grow stronger or weaker. Adding sound or other cues can change how we perceive the color or timing. That tells us that the brain doesn't just rely on vision. It uses all available input to build the best guess about what's going on. In a lab, the Color Phi phenomenon is used to study decision-making in the brain. It shows that the brain sometimes delays perception to get better accuracy. That delay is tiny, fractions of a second, but enough to change what we see. It's a reminder that our experience of the world is not always immediate. It's built from data, shaped by timing, and edited by the brain before we ever become aware of it. That process helps us make sense of motion, color, and cause, even when the truth is missing. The impossible trident, often called the Blivet, is a drawing that shows an object with 3 cylindrical prongs connected to a single bar at one end. At first glance, it looks like a simple tool with 3 arms. But when you look closely, the shape doesn't add up. The 3 prongs begin as round, solid shapes at the far end, but as they come together toward the base, they seem to merge into 2 flat arms. Then a third shape, which should connect to a third prong, turns into an empty space shaped like a fork tine. The more you look, the less sense it makes. Your eyes say it's a 3-pronged object, but your brain can't figure out how those prongs connect. The object can't exist in real space. This illusion works because of how the brain reads lines, shapes, and depth cues. The drawing uses familiar shapes, circles, bars, and lines to suggest a 3D object. Our brains are trained to interpret flat images as if they show real structures. We expect things like parallel lines to stay parallel, and parts that connect at one end to connect at the other. The impossible trident breaks these rules in subtle ways. It leads the eye down a path that seems logical at first, but then falls apart under close inspection. Start at the rounded ends of the trident. There are 3 smooth, evenly spaced cylinders, like the prongs of a fork. They look solid and 3-dimensional, but follow those prongs down toward the base. The center prong begins to flatten out, and then instead of ending in a proper bar or base, it turns into negative space. The gaps between the prongs seem to morph into solid bars, and what should be the solid bar becomes an empty slot. If you try to trace each prong from end to end, they don't line up. The math of the shape fails. It's like a puzzle with too many edges or a sentence with missing words. One reason the illusion is so effective is that it uses consistent drawing techniques to build an inconsistent object. The lines are clean, the shading makes sense. Each prong looks like it belongs in a normal 3-dimensional object. There's no obvious visual error like crooked lines or uneven spacing. That consistency makes the shape seem believable at first. Your brain tries to solve the image like a 3D model. It treats each part as a real element of a single object. But the pieces don't fit together. The connections between them are false. They suggest depth and perspective where none exists. This illusion works because the brain takes shortcuts when processing visual information. Instead of analyzing every line and angle, the brain builds a quick model based on patterns it has seen before. It expects that similar parts should behave the same way. If two prongs look like solid cylinders, it assumes the third one is two. If two gaps between the prongs look like spaces, it assumes the third gap is also a space. But the impossible trident flips that assumption. It blends shapes in a way that makes the third prong into a void and uses empty space as if it were solid. That switch confuses the brain's model and causes a breakdown in perception. The impossible trident is not the only illusion that uses this trick. Other famous examples include the Penrose Triangle and the impossible cube. These images also create objects that look like they could exist until you try to build them. The shapes rely on the same kind of visual sleight of hand. They suggest depth through careful arrangement of lines and shading while hiding the flaws in the structure. The brain tries to make sense of the scene, but ends up accepting something that's impossible. One way to test this illusion is to try drawing the object yourself. Start with the three cylinders at one end. Then try to connect each of them to a shared base, keeping the spacing and shape consistent. You'll quickly see how hard it is. No matter how you adjust the lines, the object won't come together in a believable way. You might end up with extra edges, overlapping parts, or gaps that shouldn't be there. This exercise shows how much work the original drawing does to guide the eye and trick the brain. Artists and designers use the impossible trident to explore how visual systems work. It shows how easy it is to fool the brain using just a few lines on paper. The drawing doesn't need to move or change. It just needs to trigger the right assumptions. Once those assumptions are in place, the illusion holds. You can stare at the image for minutes and still not see where the trick happens. Your mind keeps trying to resolve the shape as a solid object, even when it knows the object can't be real. The illusion also teaches something about attention. When people first see the impossible trident, they often focus on the prongs. The rounded ends are familiar and easy to understand. They look like pipes or rods, and the shading makes them appear solid. Only after tracing the lines back to the base do viewers start to notice the contradictions. That delay in recognition shows how attention shifts from one part of the image to another, and how the brain builds the whole picture piece by piece. The illusion slips in during that process, using believable parts to create an unbelievable whole. Psychologists use illusions like this to study how vision works. They want to know how the brain handles conflict between what it sees and what it expects. In the case of the impossible trident, the brain sees a well-formed object but expects consistency. When that consistency breaks, the brain doesn't reject the image outright. It keeps trying to resolve it. That persistence reveals how deeply rooted the rules of visual interpretation are. The brain doesn't like to give up on a picture, even when it doesn't make sense. The impossible trident also appears in popular culture. It shows up in logos, cartoons, and surreal art. Designers use it to catch the viewer's eye and spark curiosity. The shape draws attention because it doesn't behave the way it should. It feels like a puzzle, and people enjoy trying to solve it. But the solution never comes because the shape breaks the rules of geometry. It's built to fail, and that failure is what makes it memorable. Some versions of the illusion add complexity. They use texture, color, or animation to make the object look even more real. Others strip it down to just the bare lines, showing how little is needed to make the illusion work. In every case, the key idea stays the same. The shape uses familiar visual cues to suggest something impossible. The brain accepts those cues without question, and the illusion takes hold. If you try to model the impossible trident in 3D software, the contradictions become even more clear. No matter how you build it, the object won't come together in space. You can create parts of it, 3 cylinders, 2 bars, but not the full structure. Something will always be out of place. That's because the illusion depends on flattening a 3D object into a 2D image in just the right way. In real space, the depth and perspective can't match what the drawing shows. There's no way to resolve the angles without bending or breaking the object. This shows that some illusions only exist in flat images. They depend on the rules of perspective, not the rules of physics. The impossible trident tricks your mind by taking advantage of how we translate drawings into mental models of real things. It uses your brain's natural skills against it. The illusion isn't a flaw in vision. It's a side effect of how powerful visual understanding can be, so powerful that it sometimes accepts the impossible as real. An ambiguous image shows more than one thing, but not at the same time. What you see depends on how you look at it. One of the most well-known examples is the duck-rabbit drawing. When you first look at it, you might see a duck facing left. Then, without the image changing, it may suddenly become a rabbit facing right. The drawing stays the same. Your eyes haven't moved much, but your mind has flipped the meaning of what you see. This kind of image doesn't give you just one answer. It holds two or more possibilities, and your brain has to choose one. It can't show you both at once. The switch from duck to rabbit or from rabbit to duck doesn't happen slowly. It's sudden. 1 second, you see a bird with a beak. The next second, that beak becomes rabbit ears. You can't force the shift. Sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes it takes longer, and sometimes one version is easier for you to see than the other. What this shows is how the brain doesn't just collect visual details, it also assigns meaning. Shapes and lines are one thing, but deciding what they represent is something else. The duck-rabbit image has one set of lines, but two meanings. Those meanings depend on interpretation, not just on sight. The image acts like a kind of visual puzzle. The pieces are clear, but the answer keeps changing. This illusion plays with perception, but it's not like a trick or a mistake. It reveals something about how vision works. Seeing is not a straight process. It's a mix of input and understanding. You don't just see the lines, you see what those lines might be. And when there are two possible answers, the brain can go back and forth between them. Another well-known example is the face vase image, often called the Rubin vase. You can see a white vase in the center of the image, or you can see two black faces looking at each other from the sides. Again, the image doesn't change, but your perception does. The brain chooses which part to treat as the figure and which part to treat as the background. If the white area is the figure, you see a vase. If the black area is the figure, you see two faces. It's impossible to see both clearly at the same time. These images challenge the idea that what we see is what's in front of us. Instead, they show that seeing involves decision-making. The brain decides what's figure and what's background. It decides what's important and what's not. And in some images, it can't decide once and for all. So it switches. You might wonder why the brain flips between the two versions instead of holding both. The answer has to do with how visual systems work. They prefer clarity. Ambiguity is not useful when trying to act in the world. So when an image can be read in two ways, the brain picks one. It picks the one that seems more likely or more familiar. Then, after a while, the other option rises to the surface. That back and forth continues as long as you keep looking. In some cases, your past experiences can shape which version you see first. If you've seen more rabbits than ducks in real life, you might see the rabbit first. If someone nearby says, "That looks like a duck," your brain is more likely to follow that lead. Context matters. What people say, what you've seen before, and even the time of year can guide what you see. One study found that people shown the duck-rabbit image near Easter were more likely to see a rabbit, while those shown it in October were more likely to see a duck. The image hasn't changed, but your associations have. Ambiguous images also vary in how easy it is to switch between meanings. Some are simple, like the duck-rabbit. Others take more effort. In some cases, you may see only one version unless someone points out the other. Then, once you see it, you can't unsee it. The brain forms a new path to that meaning, and it becomes part of your options. A good example is the image of the young woman and the old woman. At first glance, most people see one or the other. The young woman looks away, showing her cheek and ear. The old woman faces down, with her nose and chin taking the place of the young woman's cheek and jaw. It can take time to find both. But once you do, the image starts to flip. Each version becomes easier to find. The brain now has both interpretations in its system. This kind of perception isn't limited to drawings. It also happens with words and sounds. A single sound can be heard as two different words depending on context. A written sentence can mean two things if punctuation is unclear. But visual ambiguity hits fast and often feels stronger because vision is the dominant sense for most people. We trust it, so when it flips, it feels like a small surprise. These images also offer insight into how the brain handles conflicting input. Rather than breaking down, it picks one meaning and sticks with it until it changes. This behavior is not only normal, but expected. The brain is built to find the best explanation for the data it receives. When that data supports more than one explanation, it treats the options like competing answers. The strongest one wins, but only for a moment. Then the other gains strength, and the cycle continues. Ambiguous images are useful for studying how perception works. They help psychologists and neuroscientists explore how meaning is created in the brain. Researchers look at how long it takes for people to switch between meanings, how often the switch happens, and which version is seen first. These results help map the flow of perception and attention. They also show how top-down and bottom-up processing interact. Bottom-up means input from the eyes. Top-down means expectations, knowledge, and memory. Ambiguous images reveal how the brain uses both systems together. These illusions also appear in art and design. Artists like M.C. Escher use them to explore space and structure. His drawings show stairs that loop, rooms that reverse, and figures that change shape. They draw you in with logic, then twist it. The brain tries to make sense of them, but never fully can. This sense of tension, of not quite resolving, keeps the viewer engaged. Designers sometimes use ambiguous images in branding and advertising. A logo might include a hidden shape or dual meaning. This adds depth and sparks curiosity. People enjoy finding the second meaning, and once they do, they remember it. That kind of engagement is rare and valuable. Even outside of images, the idea of ambiguity affects how we read the world. When someone gives an unclear message, our minds jump to fill in the blanks. When a situation could mean one thing or another, we use past experience to decide. Ambiguous images are just a sharp example of a larger process. They show, in one glance, how the brain deals with options and makes meaning out of uncertainty. The duck rabbit is more than a curious picture. It's a mirror of how perception works. It's a way to see how the mind picks between possibilities. And once you notice it, you start to see that kind of shift everywhere, not just in drawings, but in everyday life, where meaning depends on how you look. Escher's Waterfall is a drawing that shows water flowing in a loop. At first, it looks like a simple system. Water travels through a channel, turns a few corners, falls into a basin, and then flows again. But if you follow the path closely, you'll notice something that doesn't add up. The water seems to go uphill, not just once, but again and again. It moves in a square loop, defying gravity at every turn. It powers a water wheel, falls down, and climbs back up in a cycle that never ends. That motion is impossible in real life, but it looks real in the drawing. The illusion is powerful because it's built from shapes and angles that mimic real structures. The drawing uses basic architectural elements. Pillars, channels, walls, and rooftops all appear solid and logical. There are no wild distortions or strange curves. Each section looks believable on its own. But when you connect them, the trick becomes clear. Escher designed the path of the water to suggest that it rises even as it stays level, or sometimes even goes down. He used the rules of perspective in a way that tricks the eye. Straight lines bend, angles stretch, and the water's path loops in a way that feels natural until you try to build it. The core of the illusion is a structure known as the Penrose Triangle. This is an impossible shape that appears to form a continuous triangle, even though its sides don't match up in three-dimensional space. Escher took this idea and applied it to a channel of water. He drew the channel so it appears to descend at every turn, even though it forms a closed loop. The water looks like it flows downhill from one corner to the next. But by the time it reaches the last corner, it ends up back where it started, at a higher point than it should be. That false descent is what creates the illusion of perpetual motion. The water seems to fall into a bucket or basin that turns the water wheel. Then it pours out and flows back to the top. The entire loop looks like it should work forever without any outside force. Of course, this can't happen in real physics. Water needs gravity to fall, and it can't rise without a pump. But in the drawing, the system keeps going. The water runs, the wheel turns, Nothing breaks the cycle. This illusion works because the brain reads depth and distance using clues from perspective. In real life, lines that get closer together usually mean something is moving away from you. Escher used this rule to guide the viewer's eye. He placed lines and edges so they look like they recede into space, even though they connect in ways that don't work. Shadows and surfaces add to the effect, making it harder to spot where the shape fails. To test the illusion yourself, cover part of the image. If you hide one corner of the channel, the rest may look fine. It's only when you see the full loop that the trick becomes obvious. Your brain tries to treat each section as real, but the pieces don't add up. You can't resolve the shape into a working 3D model. There's always one point, usually where the water climbs, that reveals the impossibility. Escher's Waterfall is not just about visual trickery. It also raises questions about logic and expectation. We expect water to follow gravity. When it doesn't, we feel a sense of surprise or confusion. The drawing makes us stop and think, how can this be happening? That pause, where your mind tries to make sense of the scene, is the heart of the illusion. It shows how much we rely on the rules of the physical world and how quickly those rules can be bent with a few careful lines. This drawing also explores the idea of infinity in a limited space. The waterfall looks like it could run forever. There's no pump, no motor, and no source of power besides the falling water. That suggests an endless loop, which feels both fascinating and wrong. We know machines need energy. We know that motion must be powered. But the drawing creates the illusion of energy that sustains itself. It hints at a kind of perpetual motion machine, which is impossible in real life because it violates the laws of thermodynamics. In mechanical terms, a water wheel works by letting water fall onto blades. The force of the water turns the wheel. This is how old mills used to work. But those systems needed a constant supply of water and a height difference. In Escher's drawing, the same water appears to climb back to the top on its own. There's no loss, no friction, no evaporation, just motion. The system feeds itself. That makes the illusion feel like a closed loop with no beginning or end. If you try to build this structure, you'll run into problems. Architects and model builders have attempted versions of Escher's waterfall using forced perspective. These are designs that work only when viewed from a single point. From that exact angle, the lines and shapes line up to match the illusion. But if you move the camera or shift your position, the trick falls apart. The structure collapses into pieces that no longer connect. What looked like a solid path becomes a set of mismatched angles. This effect is similar to other illusions, like the impossible staircase or the Penrose Triangle. All of them rely on perspective cues that mislead the eye. But Escher's waterfall adds motion. That motion, imagined though it is, makes the illusion feel active. You don't just see a shape that can't exist, you see a process that can't happen. And because motion draws the eye, the illusion holds your attention longer. Escher's use of architecture also plays a role. He drew buildings that look real. The towers and supports seem strong. The aqueducts are wide enough for water to flow. The shadows are consistent. That realism makes the illusion more convincing. It invites the viewer to believe what they see, even as it contradicts physical law. You trust the image because it looks like the kind of structure you've seen before. The human brain loves patterns. When it sees a loop, it expects the parts to match. When lines suggest a slope, the brain assumes water will follow it. Escher uses those expectations to lead the viewer into the illusion. Each section supports the next. The cycle continues, and the brain keeps following it, trying to find the flaw. That effort, the search for the break in logic, is part of what makes the drawing so engaging. Artists and designers study Escher's waterfall to learn how to manage space and depth. They look at how he used lines, shading, and structure to build a working illusion. Mathematicians study it to explore the geometry behind impossible figures. Psychologists study it to understand how the brain interprets images. The drawing sits at the intersection of art, science, and perception. The illusion also reminds us that not everything we see can be trusted. The brain uses rules to interpret vision, but those rules can be manipulated. A drawing like Escher's waterfall uses that system against itself. It gives the brain just enough evidence to believe the scene. But when you test it, when you try to hold it in your mind as a real object, it falls apart. That tension between belief and logic is what makes the image powerful. You don't need to know math to feel the effect. Anyone can look at the drawing and sense that something's wrong. The water shouldn't go uphill. The wheel shouldn't keep turning. But it does, at least in the image. That disconnect between what the eyes see and what the brain knows is what makes Escher's Waterfall an enduring illusion. It shows how fragile our sense of reality can be, even when the clues seem clear. Try focusing on one corner of the cube. For example, stare at the lower left vertex. This can make the front face seem to pop out toward you. Then shift your focus to the upper right corner. You may find that the front flips, the lower face recedes, and the upper one comes forward. This happens because eye movements can change how the brain interprets the structure. Where you look affects which lines get the most attention. That attention can bias your perception in one direction. But even without moving your eyes, the cube can flip. That shows how the brain works on perception in the background. It checks and rechecks the input, even when nothing changes. It looks for a stable view, but when two views compete, it can't hold both, so it flips. The process feels spontaneous, but it follows the brain's logic. It favors clear, simple explanations. When two explanations are equal, the brain switches between them to avoid staying stuck. This same principle appears in other ambiguous images. The duck-rabbit illusion shows a drawing that can be a duck or a rabbit. The face-vase figure can be either two profiles or a single vase. In each case, the drawing supports two valid interpretations. The brain picks one, then flips. The Necker cube is a geometric version of that idea. Instead of animals or faces, it uses shape and depth. The Necker cube also reveals how perception is not only about vision. Expectation plays a role. If someone tells you the cube is leaning forward, you may see that version first. If they say it's tipping backward, you might see that instead. The suggestion primes your brain to favor one interpretation, but the flip still comes. The brain checks the other option and often switches, no matter what it was told. This flexibility is part of how the brain handles uncertain information. It doesn't freeze when data is incomplete. It offers a best guess, then stays ready to change that guess if needed. That's why we can walk through fog or see familiar shapes in clouds. The brain makes sense of unclear input by testing different models. The Necker cube shows that process in a visible, repeatable way. Artists and designers sometimes use this effect to play with space. By drawing shapes that support multiple readings, they create images that move in the viewer's mind. Architects use similar ideas in renderings or models, where a space may seem to fold or shift depending on the viewpoint. These applications show how perception affects how we understand space, not just how we see objects. The Necker cube also connects to how we read depth in real life. When we look at a real cube, our brain uses many cues: shadows, surface texture, perspective, and motion. If we move our head, the cube appears to shift. That change confirms which side is closer. But with a flat drawing like the Necker cube, those cues are missing. The brain wants to see depth, but it doesn't have the tools it normally uses. So it builds both versions and alternates between them. This process is automatic. You don't have to try to see the cube in 3D. It just happens. That's because the brain is wired to interpret depth whenever possible. We live in a 3D world, so depth perception is built into the visual system. Even flat images get scanned for clues. The Necker cube gives just enough to trigger 3D interpretation, but not enough to resolve it. In some cases, people report being able to hold one view of the cube for a long time. They use focus, breathing, or even counting to anchor their perception. But most people still experience the flip, even when they try to stop it. That shows the strength of the ambiguity. The image itself forces the brain into a loop of competing interpretations. The illusion has been used in cognitive science to study attention, decision-making, and consciousness. Researchers measure how long each interpretation holds and what factors cause the flip. They test how fatigue, mood, or distraction affect perception. They also study how the flip happens, whether it's gradual or sudden, and what brain activity goes with it. Some studies show that certain brain areas are involved in the switch. These areas deal with visual processing and control of attention. The flip may reflect a shift in how the brain allocates resources to different parts of the image. When attention moves, perception follows. This flipping behavior also helps explain why eyewitness accounts can differ. People don't just record visual input like cameras. They interpret, assume, and shift their understanding based on what they expect or focus on. The Necker cube is a small, safe way to show how fluid perception can be. The same lines, viewed by the same person, can produce different experiences in just a few seconds. The illusion is also a reminder that seeing is not the same as knowing. You can see the cube flip even when you understand that it hasn't changed. That difference between what you see and what you know is at the heart of many illusions. The Necker cube offers a clean, simple version of that disconnect. It shows how the brain builds reality from flat input and how that reality can change without warning, even when nothing else does. The Zöllner Illusion is a drawing where straight, parallel lines appear to tilt or angle away from each other. The lines are all heading in the same direction, like train tracks or the edges of a sidewalk. But when you look at the picture, they don't look straight. They seem to fan out or pinch together. The image makes you feel like the lines are converging or spreading apart, even though they're not. If you check the lines with a ruler or a straight edge, you'll see that each one is perfectly parallel to the others. This illusion happens because of shorter lines that cut across the main lines at sharp angles. These short lines are often called obliques. They intersect the long lines in a consistent pattern, each one slanted left or right in alternating directions. These short lines don't break the long lines, but they interrupt how we perceive their direction. The brain tries to sort out the visual information quickly. In the process, it misreads the angle of the long lines. It sees them as leaning or diverging, even though they're not. Imagine a set of vertical bars on a window. Now imagine that small sticks lie across each bar at an angle, like ladders tipped sideways. The small sticks don't change the actual direction of the bars, but if you look at the whole set, the bars start to look like they're tilting. That's the Zöllner illusion. Your brain struggles to separate the direction of the main lines from the slant of the smaller ones. The interference between the two creates a false sense of rotation. This illusion reveals something about how the brain handles line orientation. When we look at a group of lines, we don't measure each one individually. Instead, the brain looks for patterns and relationships. It tries to make sense of groups of lines by comparing them. If the background or intersecting elements are at an angle, they influence how the brain sees the main lines. The slanted short lines act like suggestions. They hint that the longer lines are bending, and the brain takes that hint seriously. Our visual system is built for speed. In everyday life, we need to judge lines and angles quickly. When we walk into a room, we notice walls, floors, and corners. These shapes tell us where to go and how to move. We don't stop to measure every angle. We rely on fast, efficient systems in the brain to tell us what we're seeing. That speed comes with trade-offs. One trade-off is that the brain uses context to judge direction. If the context is misleading, like in the Zöllner illusion, then our judgment is off. You can see a similar effect when looking through striped window blinds with angled light. The shadows on the floor may make the blinds look bent. Or, if you see a series of overhead wires with small markers attached, the markers can make the wires seem to twist. The real wires are straight, but the angled elements around them suggest movement or change. The Zöllner illusion uses that same principle in a controlled way. Researchers study this illusion to learn how the brain processes visual input. One key question is where in the brain this processing takes place. Some evidence points to the early visual cortex, where basic features like lines and edges are handled. Other studies suggest higher brain areas get involved, especially when the brain tries to make sense of complex shapes. The illusion may begin with basic line detection, but it likely continues as the brain pulls together multiple pieces of information into a whole scene. Artists have used illusions like this to explore space and depth. In some paintings, angled brushstrokes placed across straight lines can make the entire surface seem warped. In textiles, woven patterns with slanted threads can make fabric look stretched or curved. Designers working with patterns need to be careful about unwanted illusions. A repeated texture with the wrong angles can make floors look tilted or walls appear bowed. This illusion also shows up in printing. If a background pattern is added to a document, say for security or decoration, it can interfere with the straightness of lines or text. A perfectly straight line may look bent when printed over a pattern with angled elements. That's why some technical drawings avoid using decorative backgrounds. The lines must be read correctly, and illusions can lead to mistakes. A common way to demonstrate the Zöllner illusion is to print or draw several parallel lines spaced evenly. Then add small diagonal lines across each one. Alternate the direction of the diagonals, slant one set left, the next right, and so on. When viewed as a whole, the long lines will appear to tip inward and outward. But when you isolate a single long line, it appears straight. The illusion fades when the short lines are removed. This test confirms that the distortion is caused by the context. The strength of the illusion can change depending on how the short lines are arranged. If they are steeper, closer together, or longer, the effect becomes stronger. If they are short, shallow, or spaced out, the illusion weakens. This shows that the visual system responds to the density and angle of cues. The more data the brain has to work with, the more it builds a sense of direction, even if that sense is wrong. Some versions of the illusion use color or contrast to increase the effect. Bright, short lines over dark, long lines, or vice versa, increase the visual pull. Our eyes are more sensitive to contrast, so strong differences make the lines stand out more. That extra visibility strengthens the illusion as the slanted lines become harder to ignore. The brain integrates them more forcefully into its overall reading of the image. Children and adults both experience this illusion, although not always in the same way. Some studies suggest that younger viewers may be more sensitive to certain illusions, possibly because their visual systems are still developing. Others argue that experience plays a role. As we age and learn more about shapes, we may become slightly better at ignoring misleading cues. But even experts and trained observers are still influenced by the Zöllner illusion. It's built into the way vision works. The illusion has been used in classroom settings to teach geometry, perception, and the difference between appearance and reality. Students learn that not all lines that look crooked really are. This kind of hands-on demonstration helps show that observation must be tested. Rulers, grids, or computer tools provide measurements that vision alone cannot. That lesson applies not just in art or science, but in everyday reasoning. Even in navigation or architecture, illusions like this have consequences. If a set of lines on a map or blueprint appears tilted, it could lead to mistakes unless checked. The same is true for pilots or drivers who rely on visual alignment. Understanding that lines can appear false helps improve design and safety. The Zöllner illusion may be over 150 years old. It was first described by Johann Carl Friedrich Zöllner in 1860, but it remains an active subject of study. Its simple form hides a complex process. Behind a few drawn lines lies a detailed interaction between the eye, the brain, and the context of the image. The illusion offers a glimpse into how our minds read the world, not just by what we see, but by how we interpret what's around it. The Ponzo illusion shows how background shapes and context affect how we see size. In its basic form, the illusion uses two horizontal lines placed between a pair of diagonal lines. The diagonal lines look like train tracks stretching into the distance. The two horizontal lines are the same length, but the one placed higher between the diagonals looks longer. The brain sees it as farther away and assumes that if it appears that size from a distance, it must be larger in real terms. This illusion shows how our understanding of depth changes how we judge the size of things we see. The diagonal lines suggest perspective. When artists draw a road or train track leading into the distance, they make the parallel sides come closer together. In real life, that's not what actually happens. The sides stay the same distance apart, but they appear to converge because of how our eyes take in the scene. This is known as linear perspective, and our brains use it constantly to judge space and distance. The Ponzo illusion taps into that system and uses it to confuse the way we see size. Think of a street scene with lampposts lining both sides. The posts are all the same height, but the ones farther away appear smaller, even though you know they're not. That's depth perception at work. Your brain expects that things shrink with distance. It adjusts the image so that your sense of space stays consistent. In the Ponzo illusion, the brain applies the same rule in reverse. If two lines appear the same size on your retina, but one seems farther away, the brain assumes that the farther one must be larger in real life. So even though both lines are the same size on the page or screen, they appear different. This illusion can be used in many ways. Instead of horizontal lines between diagonals, you can place two identical circles, one near the top and one near the bottom. The top one, resting between the narrow part of the converging lines, will look bigger. The bottom one, between the wider part, will seem smaller. Again, the brain interprets the top position as farther away, so it compensates by increasing the perceived size. The same principle applies when you look at objects on a background with strong perspective cues. A person standing at the back of a long hallway might appear taller or shorter depending on what surrounds them. If a tiled floor leads into the distance, the lines between tiles shrink with depth. Placing two identical objects on different parts of that background can make them appear to differ in size. The Ponzo illusion works well because the brain wants to create a 3D world out of 2D information. The image on your retina is flat. There's no actual depth in the picture. But your brain uses rules it has learned from the physical world to interpret what it sees. These rules come from experience. You've seen that train tracks converge in the distance. You've seen that distant buildings look smaller. So when a drawing uses those same patterns, your brain treats it as a real scene. It adjusts the apparent size of the objects based on what it thinks the space should be. This kind of processing is helpful most of the time. It allows us to make quick decisions about size and distance. But in cases like the Ponzo illusion, it leads us to a false conclusion. The brain prefers a logical world. If something looks farther away, it must be bigger to look the same size. That's the assumption built into the illusion. This principle shows up in photography as well. A photo taken with a wide-angle lens stretches space and makes foreground objects appear larger. A telephoto lens compresses space, making distant objects appear closer and often larger than expected. These distortions come from changes in perspective. Photographers use this on purpose to control how the viewer perceives the scene. The Ponzo illusion is like a controlled version of that effect in a single still image. You can test the illusion easily. Draw two horizontal lines of the same length. Place them on a page with two diagonal lines that meet at a point above the page. One line goes near the narrow top, the other near the wide bottom. The top line will appear longer, even though you know it's not. You can measure it with a ruler and see that both lines are identical. The difference is not in the lines, but in what surrounds them. Some versions of the illusion replace the diagonal lines with other shapes that suggest depth. For example, a drawing of a street with buildings on either side can create the same effect. The outlines of the buildings provide the perspective cues. Or you might use rows of trees or lampposts to build the illusion. As long as the background suggests distance and the main objects are placed at different perceived depths, the size difference will appear. This illusion isn't just a visual curiosity, it has real applications. In advertising, objects may be shown with perspective lines to make them look larger or more prominent. In design, using angled lines behind a logo or product can change how big it feels. In architecture, the layout of tiles or panels can make rooms feel longer or wider. These design choices rely on the same principles that power the Ponzo illusion. Even in everyday life, you can spot the effect. If you stand on a long bridge or hallway and look at someone the same size as you, they will appear much smaller in the distance. If someone takes a photo of you from that spot and puts another person closer to the camera, the nearer person will appear giant. Your eyes are not fooled in the same way because your brain uses multiple depth cues like binocular disparity, motion, and focus. But in a flat image, like a photo or drawing, your brain relies more on perspective and the illusion takes over. There's also an emotional aspect to the illusion. Things that look bigger seem more important or powerful. Advertisers and filmmakers use that effect to draw attention. A product placed at the far end of a converging space might look larger and more prominent than it really is. The Ponzo illusion explains how that works, even if viewers don't notice what's happening. In experiments, people consistently report the top object as larger, even when shown side by side later. That shows how strongly the brain trusts perspective. Even when given a chance to correct the error, perception often sticks with the first impression. The illusion persists because the brain's depth rules are deeply rooted. The Ponzo illusion also varies in strength depending on the clarity of the background cues. If the perspective lines are faint or unclear, the illusion weakens. If they are bold and extend far into the distance, the illusion strengthens. That shows how the brain weighs different pieces of information when deciding what it sees. The more confident it is in the depth cues, the more it will adjust the perceived size. Children and adults both experience the illusion, but young children may not show as strong a response. That suggests the illusion becomes stronger with age and experience. As the brain learns more about depth and space, it becomes more likely to apply those rules to flat images. That supports the idea that perception is learned, not just automatic. The Ponzo illusion is one of the clearest examples of how the brain builds its version of reality. It shows that size and space are not just out there in the world. They are shaped by what we expect, what we've seen before, and how we interpret context. The illusion is a small, simple drawing, but behind it is a powerful system that turns flat shapes into living space and tiny lines into objects that seem to grow or shrink, all based on where we place them. Rubin's vase is a simple black and white image that creates a powerful shift in what we see. The picture can look like a vase sitting in the center of the image, but without warning, it can change. Instead of a vase, you might suddenly see two faces looking at each other. The image hasn't changed, but your perception has. You can't see both the vase and the faces clearly at the same time. Your mind flips back and forth between them. This effect is a strong example of how we assign meaning to shapes based on context, contrast, and what we choose to treat as the figure versus the background. The image is made from two main areas. A central white shape forms what most people describe as a vase. On either side of it, black shapes curve inward. These black areas resemble the outlines of two human profiles facing each other. They have clear features, a forehead, a nose, lips, and a chin. The central white space has a symmetrical outline. It flares out at the top and bottom, forming what looks like the opening and base of a traditional vase. Your mind must decide which part of the image is the main object and which is the background. If it picks the white area as the object, the black sides fade into the background and you see a vase. If it picks the black sides as the objects, then the white area becomes the background and you see two faces. You can't hold both views at once. The brain has to commit to one or the other, even though both interpretations are equally valid. This moment of switching is what makes Rubin's vase a classic example of perceptual ambiguity. This illusion works because of a process known as figure ground assignment. In any scene, your brain tries to separate what's important, the figure, from what's less important, the ground. The figure is what you focus on. It has shape, edges, and meaning. The ground is just the space around it. This system works well most of the time. It helps you pick out a cup on a table or a face in a crowd. But when both figure and ground are equally strong, the brain struggles to choose. Rubin's vase puts the brain in that situation. If you stare at the image for a few seconds, your perception often flips on its own. The vase becomes faces, then the faces become a vase. You can try to control the flip by focusing your attention. Look directly at the central white shape. That might help you hold the vase view. Then shift your gaze to one of the black edges. That can trigger the face view. Some people can hold one view longer than the other. But the longer you look, the more likely it is that your mind will switch between them. This illusion shows that what we see isn't just about the image itself. It's about how the brain interprets it. There are no extra clues in the image to tell you which side is the object. No shadows, no color cues, no texture. The brain has to decide based on shape and context alone. That makes it a clean test of visual perception. The Rubin's vase illusion also helps explain how we recognize faces. The two profiles on the sides of the image are only partial outlines, yet the brain fills in the rest. It recognizes the curve of the nose and chin, even though the full faces aren't there. That recognition happens fast. As soon as your brain treats the black shapes as figures, It identifies them as human profiles. This happens because the brain is tuned to detect faces. We see them in clouds, tree bark, and even electric outlets. Rubin's Vase taps into that system. If you show this image to someone who has never seen it, they might see only one of the two options at first. Some people see the vase right away and are surprised when told that it also contains faces. Others see the faces and can't find the vase until it's pointed out. Once they know both interpretations are possible, they often can't stop flipping between them. That experience, the moment when perception changes, is central to how this illusion works. The design of the image matters. The balance between the black and white areas has to be precise. If one color dominates too much, the illusion weakens. If the profiles are too vague or too detailed, the brain may lean toward one view and get stuck. The best version keeps the two interpretations in perfect tension. Neither side wins for long. That tension keeps the illusion alive. Artists have used this kind of ambiguity in their work. They create images that can be read in multiple ways. A famous example is the work of MC Escher, who often built scenes where the background became the foreground and vice versa. In Rubin's Vase, the artist doesn't try to hide anything. Everything is out in the open. The lines are clear, the shapes are simple. But the brain still can't resolve both views at once. This image also has practical uses in psychology. It's used to study visual perception, attention, and consciousness. Researchers can ask people to describe what they see and measure how long it takes to switch between the two interpretations. They can look at brain activity to see what changes during the switch. These tests help us understand how the mind works when faced with competing signals. In daily life, we face figure-ground problems all the time. In a noisy room, you try to pick out one voice from a crowd. On a cluttered desk, you try to find a pen among papers. The Rubin's Vase illusion shows this process in a pure form. It removes the distractions and presents just the core problem. What is the object, and what is the background? There are other images built on the same idea. Some show animals hidden in shapes. Others show landscapes that turn into faces. In each case, the brain picks one interpretation, holds it, and sometimes flips to another. Rubin's Vase stands out because it uses symmetry and human features to create a strong, clean example. This kind of illusion can even happen in real-world settings. Think of looking through a window at night. Your reflection becomes part of the scene. Sometimes you see outside. Other times you see your own face. The glass shows both, but your brain treats one as the main image and the other as background. That shift, like the one in Rubin's Vase, depends on lighting, attention, and context. Some versions of Rubin's Vase use color instead of black and white. They might use red and green or blue and yellow. The effect still works, though color can influence which part your brain treats as the figure. Bright or warm colors often feel like they come forward, while dark or cool colors feel like they recede. This can tilt the balance of the illusion. In some cases, people experience a stronger emotional reaction to one view than the other. Faces carry more meaning than objects. We connect with them, assign emotion, and even imagine personalities. When the faces appear, the image feels more social. When the vase appears, it feels more neutral. That emotional layer adds depth to how we experience the switch. Rubin's Vase remains a valuable tool for exploring how we see, what we expect, and how meaning is built from simple shapes. It's not a trick or a flaw in vision. It's a window into how the mind processes the world, how it decides what's important, what to focus on, and how even a small shift in attention can change what we see.